Now that she's gone, we don't have to pretend anymore.
Rain hammered the cemetery ground as Nolan Reyes stood over the fresh soil, covering his mother's coffin. His world had already collapsed once that week, yet the cruelest blow was still waiting. Just hours after he returned home, still wearing the same black suit, his wife placed a divorce packet on the table with the coldness of someone delivering a bill. No tear, no hesitation. Only a single sentence that sliced deeper than any grief. Now that she's gone, we don't have to pretend anymore. Nolan barely had time to understand the betrayal before the next shock hit. His wife was already preparing to marry his best friend. Something wasn't just wrong, something was planned. If you're watching this, comment where you're from and what time it is, because this story is about to unravel deeper than betrayal. And don't forget to subscribe to follow Nolan's journey. Tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. In the days before everything shattered, Nolan used to believe his life was ordinary, in the safest way. He had a steady job at a local design firm, a modest house on the edge of town, and a marriage people on social media called goals. Whenever Selena posted curated glimpses of their life, beside all of it, like a permanent fixture in every memory, stood Marcus Hale, his best friend since he was 13, a familiar shadow in every photograph where Nolan was smiling. Back then, Nolan thought that meant he was lucky. He remembered the first time he brought Selena to meet Eleanor. The afternoon light had spilled through the kitchen window, catching flour on Eleanor's hands as she kneaded dough. She had worn that old faded apron with sunflowers on it, the one she refused to throw away. Selena had arrived in a fitted beige blazer and heels too high for the uneven walkway, her perfume drifting into the house before her voice. Eleanor had wiped her hands, offered a warm but cautious smile, and said, "So you're the woman my son thinks the world of." Selena had smiled back, polite and dazzling. "I hope I can live up to that." At the time, Nolan only noticed how beautiful Selena's smile looked in his mother's kitchen. He didn't notice the way Selena's eyes swept over the worn cabinets, the cracked tiles, the chipped edge of the table taking inventory. Judging silently, he didn't see his mother's shoulders stiffen almost imperceptibly when Selena called the house cozy in that way people did when they meant small. He remembered Marcus arriving later with a six-pack and an easy grin, clapping Nolan on the back like always. "Look at you," Marcus had teased, nodding towards Selena. "I leave you alone for a minute, and you go and upgrade your whole life." Everyone had laughed. It felt natural then. Marcus blended into the scene, helping Eleanor set the table, joking with Selena about Nolan's terrible taste in music. If someone had frozen that moment and told Nolan this was the beginning of the end, he would have called them insane. He didn't see the quick glance Marcus and Selena shared when their fingers brushed while passing plates. Just a fraction of a second too long, just enough to mean nothing or everything depending on who was paying attention. Nolan wasn't. In the years that followed, their lives wove tighter together. Marcus was at every birthday, every promotion celebration, every barbecue Eleanor insisted on hosting. Even when her arthritis made it hard to stand for long, Selena said she loved how close-knit Nolan's world was, though sometimes she would make jokes about living in a small-town bubble. "Don't you ever want more?" she asked him once, lying in bed with her phone glowing against her face. A bigger city, bigger house, bigger everything. Nolan had brushed hair from her forehead, smiling. "We can have all that someday. But I like that Mom's only 15 minutes away. And Marcus, he's practically family." She'd smiled then, but it didn't reach her eyes. Family can be complicated. Moments like that slid past Nolan like soft warnings he refused to hear. Little things, so easy to explain away. Like the time he walked into the kitchen at Eleanor's house and found Selena and Marcus laughing at something on her phone, their heads bent close together. The way they straightened too quickly, like they'd been caught doing something they shouldn't. "What's so funny?" Nolan had asked, dropping his keys in the ceramic bowl by the door. Selena had locked her phone without thinking. "Just a meme," she said lightly. You wouldn't get it, Marcus added. Inside joke, married people stuff, and slapped Nolan's shoulder, as if that made it all harmless. Nolan laughed, because that was what he knew how to do, trust the people he loved, even when something in his chest tightened for reasons he couldn't name. Eleanor, washing dishes at the sink, had watched the exchange in the reflection of the window. Later that night, as she poured him tea at the small kitchen table, she'd said softly, "You sure you're seeing everything you need to see, Carino?" He had frowned. "What do you mean?" She'd hesitated, fingers tightening around the mug. "Just remember, not everyone who stands beside you is facing the same direction as you." He'd rolled his eyes, more defensive than he meant to be. "Mom, please don't start. You barely know Selena." Eleanor's gaze softened, hurt briefly flashing across her features. "I know you. And sometimes that's enough." They never finished that conversation. He'd gone home that night annoyed, telling himself his mother was being overprotective, maybe even jealous of the place Selena held in his life. It was easier to believe Eleanor didn't understand than to consider that she might see something he couldn't. Time moved forward, indifferent to his blind spots. Eleanor's illness came slowly at first, like a fog creeping under the door. She started forgetting small things. A pot on the stove, a date for a doctor's appointment. Then came the fatigue. The sharp pains she tried to dismiss as just getting older. Nolan took her to the clinic. Tests blurred together. Blood work, scans, more tests. A diagnosis that sounded clinical and distant but settled in Nolan's chest like ice. On the drives back from the hospital, Selena would sit beside him, scrolling through her phone. "It's just a lot," she said once, staring out the window. "All these appointments. It's like our whole life is centered around your mom now." "She's sick," Nolan said quietly, fingers whitening around the steering wheel. "I know," Selena sighed. "I'm just saying, we have our own life too." He remembered looking at her then, at the smooth line of her jaw, the perfect curve of her lips. The woman he had vowed to share every burden with. "She's my mother," he replied. "If I don't show up for her now, what kind of son am I?" Selena had kissed his cheek. Quick and almost obligatory. "A good one," she said. "I just hope you remember you're a husband too." Nolan tried to split himself in two. Devoted son, present husband. Marcus offered to help, like he always did. "Let me take some shifts with your mom," Marcus said, leaning against the railing of Nolan's porch. "You can't be everywhere. I've got flexible hours. I can hang out with her, make sure she eats, all that." Nolan had felt a surge of gratitude. "You'd do that, for you always." Marcus grinned. "Besides, your mom makes the best empanadas. Pretty sure I'm just in this friendship for the food." They both laughed. It felt right to say yes. It felt like Marcus doing what he'd always done, standing beside him when things got hard. But not all help is given for the reasons you think. There were days Nolan arrived at Eleanor's house and found Marcus already there. Shoes kicked off like he lived there. Sometimes Selena would be there too, claiming she'd stopped by to drop off groceries or check in. They moved around his mother's kitchen as if they were the ones who belonged to it, trading easy banter, while Eleanor sat at the table, her eyes tracking them with an expression Nolan couldn't quite read. Once, when Marcus went to answer a call and Selena stepped outside to get some air, Nolan sat across from Eleanor and reached for her hand. "You okay, Mom?" he asked. Eleanor's gaze flicked to the back door, where Selena's silhouette moved behind frosted glass. "I'm just tired," she said. "Tired of feeling like a guest in my own home." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She shook her head instead of answering, squeezing his fingers. "Prometemi una cosa. Nolan, promise me one thing. Anything. If something feels wrong," she said, voice low. "Don't keep making excuses for it just because you're afraid to be alone." The words lodged in his chest, heavy and unwelcome. He opened his mouth to respond, but the back door swung open, and Selena breezed in, cheeks flushed from the cool air. Marcus, right behind her with some joke on his lips. The moment dissolved, like so many others. As Eleanor's condition worsened, the hospital became a second home. Nolan slept more on plastic chairs than in his own bed. Selena grew quieter, pulled further into herself or into her phone. Marcus came and went, sometimes staying late into the night, volunteering to handle paperwork or talk to the nurses so Nolan could rest. More than once, Nolan woke from a restless doze to see Marcus standing by Eleanor's bed, talking in a low voice he couldn't quite catch. Once, he saw Eleanor shake her head, her eyes shining with something like fear. By the time Nolan dragged himself upright, Marcus had pasted on his usual easy smile. "Go back to sleep, man," Marcus whispered. "I've got this." Nolan wanted to trust him. He did trust him. He had built his entire adult life on that trust, but there were cracks now, micro fractures of doubt he refused to look at too closely. Because if he did, he might have to admit that the two people he loved most after his mother were sharing more than just concern. On one of the last days before Eleanor was moved to intensive care, Nolan stood in the doorway of her hospital room, unnoticed, and watched as Selena adjusted his mother's blanket. It was a tender gesture, almost loving, but the words that followed made something cold stir in his gut. "This would be easier if you'd just sign," Selena murmured, thinking they were alone. "It's not like you'll need it where you're going." Eleanor's fingers tightened weakly around the pen. "It's my money," she whispered, voice frayed. "My house, my son's future. You think I don't see what you're doing?" Selena's jaw clenched. "I'm trying to secure our future. Nolan is too soft. You raised him that way. Someone has to be practical." Nolan took a step forward, heart pounding, but a nurse pushed a cart past him, blocking his view for a second. When he slipped into the room, Selena had already straightened, her expression transformed into practiced concern. "There you are," she said, turning. "Your mom needs you to sign some insurance forms. She's getting tired." Eleanor's eyes met his. There was a message there, buried under exhaustion and pain, but he couldn't decode it. He only saw the woman who had raised him, looking smaller than she ever had. His own fear drowned out the warning. "Whatever helps her," he said hoarsely, reaching for the clipboard. Later, he would replay that moment 1,000 times, wondering what would have happened if he'd asked one more question, if he'd insisted on reading every line. But in that hallway, under fluorescent lights that hummed like insects, Nolan just signed where they pointed, trusting the people he loved not to turn his signature into a weapon. The last clear memory he had of Eleanor, before everything blurred, was not in a hospital room, but at her house, a rare weekend, when she'd felt strong enough to be discharged for a day. She'd sat in her favorite chair by the window, blanket over her knees, watching dust spin in the afternoon sun. "Nolan," she said, when he crouched by her side, "look at me." He did. Her eyes, though ringed with fatigue, were sharp. "There are storms you see coming," she murmured. "Clouds, thunder, all the warnings. And there are storms that start as a warm breeze on a sunny day. The second kind is worse, because you never think to run." He'd smiled sadly. "You always talk in riddles, Mom." She'd tried to laugh, but it turned into a cough. When it passed, she caught his wrist with surprising strength. "Just promise me you won't let anyone rewrite who you are after I'm gone." "Don't say that," he whispered. "You're not going anywhere." Eleanor had looked at him for a long, long second, as if memorizing his face. There was so much she wanted to say, but the effort of staying awake already cost her more than she had left to give. Her hand loosened, sliding from his wrist to his fingers in a silent goodbye she refused to voice. As evening fell and her breathing deepened in fragile sleep, Nolan stood in the doorway and watched his mother one last time, silhouetted against the fading light. He didn't know it then, but that image, the curve of her profile, the way the shadows held her, would haunt him long after soil covered her coffin. At the time, all he felt was fear and love, and a desperate, stubborn hope that things would somehow be okay. He didn't see the storm already forming just beyond the horizon, wearing familiar faces and smiling with his best friend's mouth and his wife's lips. The morning after Eleanor was taken back into the hospital, Nolan stood inside her room, feeling like an intruder in his own life. Machines blinked beside her bed, each one delivering some new reminder that she was no longer the unshakable force who raised him. The soft, irregular beeps blended with his heartbeat until they felt indistinguishable. It was strange how quickly a hospital room could become a world, and how easily the world outside could fade into something irrelevant. Selena arrived later that afternoon, the click of her heels sharp against the linoleum floor. She smelled of citrus perfume and cool air, as if she had walked straight from a boardroom instead of a house where her husband had barely slept. "You're still here?" she asked, setting her bag on the chair. Her voice was neutral, but something underneath sounded impatient. "Where else would I be?" Nolan murmured, not looking up. Selena sighed, stepping closer to adjust Eleanor's blanket. Her fingers moved with precision rather than tenderness. "You need rest too. You're not saving anyone by torturing yourself." Nolan forced a tired smile. "It's not torture. She'd do the same for me." "Maybe," Selena said, her tone unreadable. "But you're not her." He looked up at that, the words striking him from a direction he didn't expect. Before he could respond, Marcus walked in with a paper cup of coffee, and that familiar grin that used to feel like home. "Brought you something," Marcus said, offering the cup. "Figured you could use the caffeine." Nolan accepted it, grateful, even when the coffee tasted bitter. "Thanks. You didn't have to come." Marcus shrugged. "Of course I did. Your mom's always been good to me. Besides, you looked like hell the last time I saw you." Nolan tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "I feel worse." Selena's gaze flicked between the two men, and then to Eleanor, who stirred slightly in the bed. The light overhead flickered, casting a faint shadow across her face. She opened her eyes just long enough to find Nolan's, offering a weak smile that crumpled his heart. "Mi cielo," she whispered. He leaned forward, brushing a thumb over her hand. "I'm here, Mom. I'm not going anywhere." Behind him, he heard Marcus shift his weight, and something about the motion felt off, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Nolan didn't turn around. He didn't want to see something he wasn't ready to acknowledge. The next few days blurred into a cycle of alarms, doctors, and clipped conversations. Eleanor's condition worsened faster than anyone predicted. One morning, she was sitting upright, asking if Nolan had eaten. By evening, she was struggling just to stay awake. Doctors told him it was a natural progression of her illness, but the speed of it gnawed at him. He wasn't a medical expert, yet the shift felt abrupt, unnatural. One night, while he dozed off in the chair beside Eleanor's bed, he heard hushed voices at the doorway. He blinked awake and saw two nurses whispering, their expressions uneasy. "She was fine last week," one said. "Stable. Meds were working." The other nurse shook her head. "Something changed recently. They adjusted her prescriptions again, but I don't understand why. Doctor's orders. I don't know. The chart looked different this morning, like someone rewrote part of it." Nolan sat up straighter, pulse spiking. When the nurses noticed him watching, they quickly dispersed with polite smiles, the kind that hid more than they revealed. He turned to Eleanor, studying her face. "Mom, what's happening to you?" Eleanor whispered something he couldn't make out. Her eyes fluttered open, locked onto his with surprising clarity. "Nolan," she murmured, her voice raspy. If things get worse, remember what I..." She broke off as a wave of pain stole her breath. Nurses rushed in, checking vitals, adjusting equipment. Selena slipped into the room, expression tight. "What happened?" she demanded. "They're giving her meds again," Nolan said, rising. "She was trying to tell me something." Selena waved him off. "She's delirious, Nolan. Don't stress her more." He stared at her, confusion coiling inside him. Delirious, or trying to explain something important. Selena's jaw tightened. "She's dying. She doesn't always know what she's saying." The words hit him like a slap. Nolan turned toward the bed again, driven by a sudden urgency. to capture every whispered breath Eleanor might offer. But by the time the nurses left the room, Eleanor had slipped back into a semi-conscious haze. He sat with her through the night, listening to the rise and fall of her breathing. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, washing the room in a sterile glow. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. Early in the morning, as dawn filtered faintly through the blinds, Eleanor's breathing stuttered. A nurse rushed in, then another, and suddenly the room erupted in movement, machines chiming, hands working, voices layering over each other. Nolan stood frozen at the side of the bed, unable to breathe, unable to understand. "What's happening?" he choked. "We're doing everything we can," a nurse said, guiding him back. But there was a finality in her voice that hollowed him out. When the machines let out a long, unbroken tone, the world seemed to tilt. The nurse pressed a button. Doctors murmured condolences. Nolan didn't hear anything, except the echo of that sound, flat, unforgiving. Selena entered seconds later, a sheen of sweat on her forehead, as though she had run to get here, but her eyes dry. Composed, gave no indication of grief. "I got here as fast as I could," she said, breathless. Nolan didn't look at her. He couldn't. He touched Eleanor's cheek, still warm, and felt something inside him collapse. Marcus arrived soon after, placing a hand on Nolan's shoulder. Too confidently, too familiar. "I'm so sorry, man," he murmured. "She didn't suffer. That's what matters." Nolan's throat tightened. "How do you know?" Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "I mean, look at her. She seems peaceful." Selena stepped in quickly. "Nolan, please, don't make this harder." He pulled away from them, unable to endure their presence. Everything felt wrong. The sterile smell, the soft hush of feet in the hallway, the way Selena's voice stayed steady while his heart was breaking. And Marcus always there, always showing up at moments too perfectly timed. As the hospital staff prepared paperwork, Nolan stepped outside the room to breathe. His mind buzzed. Images overlapped. Selena whispering to Eleanor about signing something, Marcus in the doorway late at night, the nurses discussing rewritten charts. Yet when he tried to thread them together, the thoughts dissolved like fog. He hated himself for even wondering, for entertaining the idea that something darker lurked beneath the grief, and yet the pieces felt wrong, jagged. Later that day, as arrangements were made and condolences offered, a young nurse named Ava approached him quietly. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. "Your mother was very kind." "Thank you." Nolan managed. Ava hesitated, glancing down the hallway to ensure no one was listening. She left something with me." "For you?" Nolan frowned. "What do you mean?" "She asked me to give it to you if something happened to her." Ava's hands trembled slightly. "But I didn't know if I should. Things at the hospital were strange recently." Nolan felt the air shift around him. "Strange how?" Ava swallowed. "The medication doses, the changes in her chart. Some of us, we didn't understand why the orders were different." His pulse hammered. "Different how?" Before she could answer, another nurse called her name sharply from down the hall. Ava flinched. "I have to go," she whispered. "But don't ignore this. She wanted you to have it." She slipped a small sealed envelope into his hand and hurried away. Nolan stared at it, fingers shaking. The weight of it felt heavier than paper should. Like something his mother had poured her last strength into, he slipped it into his pocket just as Selena appeared beside him, her voice soft and controlled. "They're ready for us to sign the release," she said. "Yeah," he murmured, still staring down the hallway where Ava had disappeared. "Okay." Selena gave him a long look, as though trying to read something in his expression. "You're not thinking clearly right now? Don't make any decisions until you've rested." He nodded mechanically, but his mind was already somewhere else on the envelope, on the whispers, on the chart that had been rewritten. He didn't know it yet. But the moment he accepted that envelope, the truth began to claw its way toward the light. He had lost his mother, but the story of her death had only just begun to speak. The house felt colder than Nolan remembered. Grief had a way of stripping warmth from everything it touched. But this was different. This coldness felt deliberate, as though the walls themselves withdrew from him. He dropped his keys on the table and stood there for a long moment, trying to breathe through the ache in his chest. The silence was heavy, almost unnatural. When the front door clicked shut behind him, it sounded like the final punctuation on a sentence his life had been trying to write for months. Selena emerged from the hallway, already changed out of her funeral dress. She wore a fitted sweater, hair pulled back in a sleek knot. Not a trace of the day lingered on her, no red around the eyes, no trembling hands. She looked composed, too composed. "You're back," she said, her voice devoid of softness. Nolan nodded, removing his coat. "Yeah, I needed some air after we left the hospital. You were gone a long time." He hesitated. "I was talking to some of the staff. They wanted to say they were sorry." Selena crossed her arms. "Hospital people say that to everyone. It doesn't mean anything." He stared at her. "It meant something to me." Her lips tightened. For a moment, neither spoke. The distance between them stretched like a rope pulled taut. Finally, Selena exhaled sharply, as if bored with the topic. "We need to talk." Nolan felt a flicker of unease. "About what?" "Us," she said simply, "and the future." He blinked at her, stunned. "Selena, my mother died today." "I know," she said, unblinking. "That's exactly why we should clear things up. You're emotional. You'll cling to anything familiar, and I won't let you cling to me." A chill ran through him. "What are you saying?" Selena walked to the dining table, where a folder sat neatly aligned with the edge, like she'd placed it with careful intention. She opened it, revealing a stack of crisp papers. "I'm filing for divorce," she said. Immediately, Nolan's breath caught. For a moment, he wondered if grief had twisted his reality. "What?" "I've been thinking about it for a long time," Selena said, flipping through the papers. "I stayed because of your mother. I thought it would be cruel to leave when she was so ill. But now," Nolan echoed, voice trembling. "Now what? It's really men." Selena closed the folder. "Now there's nothing tying us together." He stared at her, feeling his throat burn. "We're married, Selena. That's what ties us together. Marriage isn't supposed to be a cage," she snapped. "And I'm done pretending that this," she gestured around, dismissive, "is the life I want." Nolan sank into a chair, the weight of her words pressing him down. "Pretending. Since when have you been pretending?" Selena's jaw stiffened. "Since I realized you're content being small, that you'll never become more than this town, this house, this version of yourself. I want a partner with ambition, with drive, someone who understands me." He swallowed hard. "I could have understood you. You never gave me a chance." "No," she said coldly. "You never listened." The accusation cut deeper than anything so far. Nolan opened his mouth, desperate to make sense of the unraveling. But Selena raised a hand. "It doesn't matter anymore. I've already made arrangements." "Arrangements for what?" he whispered. "For my next chapter," she said. Before he could ask what that meant, the doorbell rang. Nolan frowned. "Who would come by tonight?" Selena didn't answer. Instead, she smoothed her sweater and walked to the door with eerie calm. When she opened it, Marcus stood on the porch. He wasn't wearing black anymore. He wasn't mourning. He looked relaxed, relieved. "Hey," Marcus said quietly, stepping inside. His eyes flicked to Nolan, but not with the empathy a best friend should have, more like someone checking to see whether a trap had already sprung. Nolan rose slowly from his chair. "Why are you here, Marcus?" Marcus exchanged a glance with Selena, a glance so practiced, so intimate. Nolan felt something inside him crack. "I'm here because you deserve the truth," Marcus said. Selena stepped closer to Marcus, her shoulder brushing his. "We didn't want to hide anymore." "Hide what?" Nolan asked, though the answer hovered in the air like smoke. Marcus took a breath. "Selena and we're together." Nolan's vision blurred. No, you're joking. This is some sick attempt to It's not a joke, Selena said. I'm moving on. With him. You were my best friend, Nolan whispered, staring at Marcus. My brother. Marcus lowered his gaze, but only briefly. People change, man. No, Nolan said, voice trembling. You changed. You both changed, and you didn't even wait. My mother's body isn't even in the ground yet. Selena's expression hardened. Don't make this dramatic. Your mother didn't control when things fell apart. Nolan's jaw clenched. She wasn't the one falling apart. My marriage was. And you let it happen. Selena didn't flinch. Because it was already broken. He shook his head slowly. How long? Neither answered. How long? He repeated. Louder this time. Marcus exhaled. A while. Nolan looked between them, and for the first time, he saw clearly every late-night check-in, every shared smile, every whispered conversation he thought meant nothing. It meant everything. You're filing for divorce so you can be with him, Nolan said. Disbelief, morphing into something sharper. That's the real reason. Selena's silence was confirmation enough. Marcus stepped forward, putting on a facade of sympathy. Look, man, we didn't plan it like this. We tried to fight it. We didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me. Nolan snapped. You already did. Selena sighed, picking up the folder again. Sign the papers. The sooner we're done, the better for all of us. He stared at her, at Marcus, at the pieces of his life, shattered and scattered at their feet. Nolan, Marcus said softly, this is for the best. You deserve someone who fits you. Selena and I. We just fit each other. Nolan's hands trembled as he backed away. Get out. Selena frowned. Don't be childish. Get out. Nolan roared. The sound ripped from a place deeper than grief. Marcus stepped in front of Selena protectively. We'll leave, but this is happening. You can't stop it. As they walked out the door together, Nolan felt something colder than anger settle into his bones. Clarity. He collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. His mother had sensed something. The nurses had whispered suspicions. Ava had handed him an envelope. The world had been giving him warnings. He was too loyal, too trusting to see. When he finally lifted his head, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a crime scene. Not of violence, but of betrayal. Hours later, long after darkness swallowed the neighborhood, Nolan opened the envelope from Ava. Inside was a single line of handwritten text in Eleanor's shaky scrawl. If anything happens to me, trust what you see, not what you're told. Nolan stared at the words until they burned into his mind. And for the first time, he allowed himself to question everything. Not just Selena, not just Marcus, but the circumstances of Eleanor's death. There were truths buried beneath grief, and they were beginning to stir. Nolan didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dim glow of the kitchen, the envelope from Ava, resting on the table like a heartbeat he couldn't ignore. His mother's words kept echoing in his head. Trust what you see, not what you're told, but what he had seen tonight. Selena nesting into Marcus's shadow, as if she had always belonged there, felt too surreal to trust. His body ran on numb autopilot, replaying every smile, every touch, every moment that now seemed like a thread in a long, hidden pattern. His phone buzzed around dawn. He picked it up without looking. A text from an unknown number flashed on screen. You should check your mailbox. He froze. The timing was too sharp to be coincidence. Was it Ava? Someone else? His stomach churned, but he forced himself to stand, walk to the door, and step into the morning air, thick with the smell of wet earth. Inside the mailbox, resting on top of an advertisement booklet, lay a small ivory envelope. Elegant, formal, expensive. The kind of envelope used for celebrations, not condolences. His pulse slowed. No, it couldn't be. Not so soon. He tore the envelope open with stiff fingers. A wedding invitation slid into his hand. You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Selena Ward and Marcus Hale. The date, printed in delicate gold, was 2 weeks from today. 2 weeks. His mother had died yesterday. For a moment, the world tilted. Voices seemed to stretch thin in the air. Nolan gripped the mailbox to steady himself as a jagged laugh escaped him, one without humor, one that sounded like something breaking. He stumbled back inside, clutching the invitation. He placed it on the table beside the divorce papers Selena had left. The two documents, the end of his marriage and the beginning of theirs, sat side by side, mocking him with their precision. They had planned this. They had planned all of this. He sank into a chair, the room spinning. Images crashed over him. Selena adjusting her hair when Marcus walked into the room. Marcus offering to help out at the hospital. The way they always seemed to share conversations he wasn't invited into. His loyalty had blinded him, and now the blindness itself felt like betrayal. He was still reeling when he heard footsteps outside. The crunch of gravel. A hesitant pause. Nolan rose, wiping a hand across his face before opening the door. Mrs. Landry, the elderly neighbor who always wore oversized glasses and carried too many grocery bags, stood trembling nervously on the porch. "Nolan, sweetheart," she said in a careful whisper. "I wasn't sure if I should come, but I heard about your mother." Her eyes softened. She was a good woman. "Thank you." Nolan managed. "That means a lot." Mrs. Landry glanced around, as if afraid to be seen. "There's something else. I shouldn't get involved, but well, I saw something." Nolan stiffened. "What do you mean?" "The night before your mother passed," she said, lowering her voice further. "I saw your wife leaving your mother's house late, very late. And she didn't look upset. She looked determined." His chest hollowed. "Are you sure? I've lived on this street for 40 years, Mrs. Landry whispered. "I know what grief looks like. And that wasn't it." He swallowed. Hard. "Did you see anyone else?" She paused. "Your friend Marcus. He was there too. Earlier that evening. They didn't come together, but it felt odd." Nolan's skin prickled, his breath unsteady. "Did they go inside?" "Yes," she said. "Both of them." The floor beneath him seemed to shift. "Why didn't you say this earlier?" Her lips trembled. "Because it wasn't my place. And your wife, well, she told me not to worry about what I think I saw. Said your mother needed rest, and that I should keep my distance. I didn't want to stir trouble. But after the funeral, I realized something wasn't right." Nolan pressed a hand to his forehead. "Thank you," he whispered. "Really." She touched his arm gently. "Be careful, dear. Sometimes the people closest to us, they're the ones who can cut deepest." When she left, Nolan stood in the doorway for a long time, gripping the frame as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. Inside, the house felt different, charged. And when he looked again at the wedding invitation, a spark of something unfamiliar tugged at his chest. Not grief, not shock, a beginning of anger. Not the wild kind that burned out quickly, but something sharper, focused, cold. By early afternoon, Nolan forced himself to leave the house. Every corner suffocated him. The walls remembered too much. He drove aimlessly until he found himself at a small overlook above the river, a place he had gone with his mother as a boy. The view blurred as he sank onto a bench, burying his face in his hands. He felt so small, so abandoned, so useless. But then he remembered Eleanor's voice. "Don't let anyone rewrite who you are after I'm gone." He lifted his head. He had failed her in life. He would not fail her in death. As evening fell, Nolan drove to the place where the wedding was scheduled to be held, a sleek private estate outside town. He parked across the street, hidden behind a line of tall hedges. Workers were already hanging fairy lights from the pergola. An archway stood in the garden, wrapped in pale roses and eucalyptus. A wedding. For her, for him, together. Nolan's breath caught when he saw Selena through the fence. She wore a white designer coat, more expensive than anything she had ever purchased while married to him. Marcus stood beside her, hands in his pockets. They stood shoulder to shoulder, reviewing the setup. Selena leaned into Marcus's side. He kissed her temple. Nolan's stomach twisted. Selena turned slightly, giving him a clear view of her face. She was smiling, smiling days after destroying his life, smiling days after his mother's death, when she hadn't shed a single tear. Her smile was radiant. It made Nolan's fingertips go numb. He pressed himself deeper behind the hedge, watching as they moved across the lawn, pointing at details. Speaking with planners, they looked like a couple planning a future they had stolen. Every moment made the pieces rearrange in Nolan's mind. He no longer saw coincidences or unfortunate timing. He saw intention, patterns, strategy. He saw betrayal organized with precision. When he finally left, his heart felt carved out and hollow, but something inside him had hardened. He needed answers, truth, proof, but most of all, he needed to understand why. Later that night, back home, Nolan sat on his bed, holding Eleanor's envelope again. Something about the weight of it felt off he hadn't noticed before. There was something else inside. He carefully tore the seam wider and shook it until a second object slid into his palm. A small silver key. Attached was a note in Eleanor's shaky handwriting. "When you're ready, visit the attic. Look for the blue box." A chill traced his spine. He had grown up in that attic. Dusty summers, old toys, boxes of memories, but there had never been a blue box, unless Eleanor had placed it there recently. Unless she had hidden something, knowing she might not get the chance to speak. Nolan climbed the attic stairs, with his heart climbing his throat. The wooden door creaked when he pushed it open. The smell of cedar and old insulation filled the air. He switched on the light. Rows of boxes lined the walls. Holiday decorations, childhood art projects, old blankets, but no blue box. Not yet. He moved deeper. Shadows stretched. Dust floated through the dim bulb's glow. Behind a stack of old suitcases, something caught the light. Blue. A small wooden box, navy, hand-painted, with a silver lock that matched the key in his hand. His fingers shook as he approached. He slid the key into the lock. It clicked. Inside lay a bundle of papers, a small flash drive, and a handwritten letter from Eleanor. Nolan unfolded the letter. Her handwriting wavered, but each word hit with clarity. "If you are reading this, then I could not tell you in time. People you trust have been visiting me without your knowledge. Someone changed my medications. I tried to warn you, but I didn't want to cause you pain unless the truth became necessary. Follow the numbers in the ledger. Protect yourself. Trust your eyes. I love you." Nolan's breath left him in a shattered exhale. Someone had changed her medications. Someone had visited her alone. Someone had made sure Nolan never heard her final warning. And now, those same people were getting married while her son mourned. Nolan sank to the attic floor, letter crumpling in his trembling hands. His grief ignited into something else entirely. Resolve, he would no longer be the victim of their narrative. They had taken his wife. They had taken his stability. They had taken his mother. He wouldn't let them take the truth. This time, he would trust what he saw, and he was seeing everything clearly. Nolan didn't remember driving to the law office. His mind was too full, too loud. By the time he stood in the marble-floored lobby of Graham Lockwood and Associates, his breath had already lost its rhythm. The receptionist recognized him immediately. Everyone in town knew the story of Nolan Reyes, the dignified widow who had spent her life teaching at the elementary school and raising her son alone after her husband died young. "Mr. Reyes," the receptionist said gently, "Mr. Lockwood is expecting you." Expecting him. Eleanor's death had barely passed a day, yet things were already moving without Nolan's consent. He followed the receptionist down a hallway, lined with framed legal certificates. Everything smelled faintly of leather and old paper. Graham Lockwood was a tall, silver-haired man with a calm presence, the sort of attorney people trusted instinctively. He stood when Nolan entered the office, his expression solemn. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Nolan," he said, placing a firm hand on Nolan's shoulder. "Your mother was a remarkable woman." Nolan swallowed, the words hard to form. "Thank you. She left me something." Graham nodded and gestured toward a chair across from his desk. Yes, and I believe we should go over it together. Nolan sat, clasping his hands. The office felt too big, too quiet. Graham opened a long wooden drawer and removed a set of documents bound with a burgundy ribbon. He set them gently on the desk. This is your mother's official will, Graham explained. Signed and notarized 5 years ago. She made some updates in the last few weeks, some of which raised questions. What kind of questions? Nolan asked, leaning forward. Graham hesitated. Changes to beneficiaries? Adjustments to financial accounts? Additional authorizations on her medical and insurance documents. Nolan blinked. Wait, authorizations. Added by whom? Graham folded his hands. By your wife. For a moment, Nolan didn't understand the words. They floated in the air, unreal. Selena, he repeated. Yes, Graham said carefully. According to the documents, your mother added her as an emergency medical proxy and secondary beneficiary, but his voice lowered. Some signatures do not match your mother's handwriting. Nolan's stomach dropped. Are you saying someone forged them? I'm saying, Graham replied, choosing his words precisely, that it is highly irregular for these changes to have been filed when they were and your mother was in no condition to sign anything during that period. I know her handwriting well. These last signatures are suspicious. Nolan's pulse hammered. Why didn't the hospital question it? They process dozens of documents daily, Graham said. Unless someone raises a concern, or there's obvious fraud, papers get filed without deeper inspection. Nolan leaned back, staring numbly at the ceiling. His mother's warning echoed. Trust what you see. The blue box in the attic. The ledger. Eleanor's shaky handwriting confessing her fear. What did the will say? Nolan whispered. Graham opened the folder. Your mother left you the house, her savings, and her pension benefits. Nolan nodded stiffly. That sounds right. But there is more. Graham hesitated. She also allocated a portion of her assets to an unnamed individual, a placeholder, beneficiary C. No identity attached. What does that mean? Nolan frowned. It means, Graham said, that she intended to designate someone but didn't complete the documentation. Or someone prevented her from completing it. Prevented. The word punched Nolan's chest. Do you have any idea who it might be? Graham asked quietly. Nolan shook his head. No, but I found a ledger in her attic. She left me clues. I think, and a flash drive. Graham's brows rose. Really? She didn't mention that to me. She couldn't, Nolan murmured. She tried to warn me, but I didn't listen. He felt shame coil in his gut. How many times had he dismissed her concerns? How many times had Selena told him Eleanor was paranoid or dramatic? And he believed her. I'd like to see the ledger, Graham said. But first, there's something else you need to know. He handed Nolan a smaller sealed envelope. Your mother left you a personal message. She gave this to me months ago with instructions to deliver it only after her passing. Nolan's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a short letter. Mi querido hijo, forgive me for the secrets. I only wanted to protect you while I still could. People close to you may not have your best interest at heart. Follow the trail in the ledger. Don't confront anyone until you understand the full truth. I love you. Be strong, Mama. Nolan folded the letter slowly, fighting the burn behind his eyes. She knew, he whispered. She knew something was happening. Yes, Graham said softly, and she tried to stop it. Nolan shook his head. I should have listened to her. You were busy caring for her, Graham said gently. And the people around you, well, they may have manipulated the situation. Manipulated? The word wrapped cold fingers around Nolan's spine. Graham opened another folder. There's one more matter. A recent insurance policy. Your mother listed you as the primary beneficiary. 12 dezexes. Okay, Nolan said slowly. But a secondary beneficiary was added about a week before her death. Who? Nolan asked. Graham closed the folder, his expression grave. Selena. Nolan went still. She claimed your mother requested the addition personally, Graham said. But given your mother's condition that week, that seems highly questionable. Blood roared in Nolan's ears. So she would benefit if my mother died, he said flatly. Graham didn't answer. He didn't need to. Nolan's hands curled into fists. What about Marcus? Is he connected to any of this? Graham flipped through another paper. There are transfers from your mother's secondary account to a business entity registered under Marcus Hale. Nolan's breath hitched. Transfers? How many? Several, Graham said. Over the last month, Nolan felt sick. What kind of business? A consulting firm that appears to be inactive, likely a shell company. The pieces slammed together. Selena visiting Eleanor alone. Marcus volunteering to help, the rewritten medical charts, the wedding invitation printed before Eleanor's death certificate was even drafted. What do I do now? Nolan asked, voice thick. Graham studied him carefully. You pursue the truth, but cautiously. People who commit fraud this calculated rarely stop at paperwork. Nolan tightened his jaw. I'm not afraid of them. You should be, Graham said, because if they did tamper with medical orders or finances, they're capable of far more than betrayal. A cold shiver climbed Nolan's spine. Graham continued. I know a private investigator, Daniel Price. He specializes in elder care fraud and medical record tampering. I think you should speak with him. Set it up, Nolan said instantly. Graham nodded. I will. But Nolan, understand this. Once you go down this path, you cannot turn back. Selena and Marcus may retaliate. Nolan thought of the wedding invitation, the way they smiled, the way Selena told him, now there's nothing tying us together, he exhaled shakily. I'm not turning back. When Nolan left the office, the world outside looked sharper. As if someone had peeled away a thin film he never knew existed, he sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, staring through the windshield without starting the engine. For months, he'd been drifting too tired, too trusting, too distracted. Now everything felt electric. He drove to his mother's house, not the place of betrayal, but the place of truth. The moment he stepped inside, the familiar scent wrapped around him. Cinnamon tea, old books, eucalyptus, from the diffuser Eleanor loved. This was the home of a woman who saw more than she spoke, a woman who tried to protect him. He went upstairs and pulled the blue box from his bag. He examined the ledger more closely this time. Names, dates, numbers, transfers, each line a quiet scream Eleanor had never been able to voice. One entry stood out. MH visit. Medication chart changed. Spoke to nurse privately. Concern. Marcus Hale. Medication chart changed. Another entry. S. Insisted I sign forms. Refused. She angry. Selena, angry. A final entry. If something happens, check policy changes. Not my signature. Not my signature. Nolan closed the ledger and let out a long exhale. His mother hadn't been paranoid. She'd been hunted. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We need to talk. It's about your mother. Nolan's heart raced. Ava, he responded. Where? Her reply came instantly. The hospital parking lot, tonight. Come alone. Nolan closed his eyes. His heartbeat a drum inside his chest. He had been blind too long. Now he would see everything. By the time night settled over the town, a foggy haze clung to the streets, like a curtain drawn for some private, unfolding tragedy. Nolan drove toward the hospital with both hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles pale beneath the dim dashboard lights. Every breath felt like a negotiation, just to stay anchored in his own body. The parking lot was nearly empty when he arrived. Sodium street lamps cast long amber pools across the asphalt, stretching shadows into strange shapes. He parked beneath the farthest lamp, half instinct, half paranoia, and waited. Ava Collins stepped out from behind a row of cars, her figure small but deliberate. She still wore scrubs under a hoodie, the ID badge tucked into her pocket. Her face looked older than he remembered from the day Eleanor passed, drawn tight with something like guilt, or maybe fear. Nolan stepped out of his car, the cold biting his skin. You said you had something to tell me. Ava looked around before approaching him. I didn't know if you'd come. I didn't know if I'd leave, Nolan admitted quietly. But I need the truth. All of it, Ava exhaled shakily. Then you're not going to like what I have to say. Her voice trembled. But the conviction behind it didn't. They walked to the far corner of the lot, where a flickering bulb buzzed overhead like a dying insect. Ava crossed her arms and stared at the pavement. I've been replaying everything in my head, she began, trying to figure out the moment I should have said something earlier. Maybe I'm too late, but I promised your mother I'd tell you if she couldn't. Nolan swallowed. Tell me what? Ava met his eyes with a steadiness that chilled him. Your mother didn't deteriorate naturally, Nolan. Something or someone accelerated her decline. The cold in Nolan's chest expanded, filling every rib. Explain. I was one of the primary nurses assigned to your mother, Ava said. She was stable, weak, yes, but stable. Her vitals were consistent. Her medication dosage hadn't changed in weeks. And then it did, Nolan whispered. Ava nodded slowly. 3 days before she passed, her file showed a new medication schedule, higher dosage, additional sedatives, a combination that can suppress breathing in patients her age. Who authorized that? Nolan's voice dropped into something raw and dangerous. That's the problem. The orders were signed by a doctor who was off shift at the time. Dr. Myers. He told me he never wrote them. Someone forged his signature. Nolan stared at her, the world narrowing until it felt like he was breathing through a straw. Someone forged hospital orders. Yes, Ava whispered, and your mother knew something was wrong. She told me she felt foggy and heavy after each dosage. She asked me to check the bottles, but it wasn't my place to override orders. Nolan pressed a hand to his forehead, trying to process. Who had access to her room? Staff, Ava said, and family members approved on her visitation list. Nolan's pulse quickened. My mother's visitation list should have only had me. Ava hesitated. It didn't. He felt the ground shift beneath him. Who else? Your wife, Ava said, and Marcus Hale. Nolan went still. Your mother told me she didn't approve their visits. She said they came when you weren't there. Sometimes late, sometimes early, always for short periods. A cold wave crashed over Nolan. Why didn't anyone tell me? Ava's expression contorted. Your wife said you were overwhelmed, that she was helping you make decisions. She seemed in control of everything. And the hospital doesn't question a spouse. Nolan's breath came shallow. She manipulated access. Ava nodded. Yes. Silence hovered between them, heavy and poisonous. But that wasn't even the worst of it, Ava whispered, her voice quivering now. The night your mother died, I wasn't supposed to be on shift, but I stayed late because something felt off. Nolan braced himself. What happened? I saw Selena leaving your mother's room, Ava said. She wasn't supposed to be there. Visiting hours were over. Nolan's jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Was she alone? Ava shook her head. I heard voices earlier. I'm not sure who. By the time I looked, Selena was coming out, looking furious, like someone who didn't get what they wanted. Did she say anything to you? Yes, Ava said quietly. She told me, make sure she gets her medication. She's been difficult tonight. Then she walked off. The words stabbed into Nolan like a blade. Difficult. My mother could barely stay awake. Ava nodded sadly. Exactly. What happened next? Nolan asked, barely holding himself together. Ava wrapped her arms tightly around herself, as if bracing against a winter only she could feel. An hour later, your mother crashed. It was too fast, Nolan, too sudden. I tried to get Dr. Myers, but he wasn't on call. The on-duty doctor followed the newly written orders, assuming everything was legitimate. A long, suffocating pause. She didn't stand a chance, Ava whispered. Nolan staggered back, gripping the railing behind him to stay upright. Every memory of Selena's coldness, every evasive look, every bruise of intuition he ignored, suddenly sharpened into a single, horrifying truth. This can't be real, Nolan breathed. You're telling me they, Ava reached toward him, her voice thick. I don't know what they did, but I know something wasn't right. Your mother knew it too. She asked me to give you that envelope because she was afraid she wouldn't make it. Nolan clenched his fists until his nails bit into his palms. Why didn't she call me? Why didn't she tell me everything? Ava looked down. She said she didn't want to burden you until she had proof. She wanted to protect you. Nolan felt something hot prickle behind his eyes. Not tears, something darker. Something rising from a place inside him he didn't know existed before grief hollowed him out. And now you understand, Ava continued softly. Why I couldn't stay quiet. Nolan looked up sharply. But how do I prove any of this? They're already planning their wedding. They think they're untouchable. You're not alone, Ava said. There are others who notice things, a resident doctor, another nurse. We were all uneasy. We just didn't know how to intervene without risking our licenses. Nolan swallowed hard. Will they talk? If someone asks the right questions, Ava said, they will. His grip tightened around the railing. His heartbeat steadied into something fierce, resolute. Ava stepped closer. Nolan, you should be careful. People who manipulate the vulnerable, who forge documents, who control access to medical records. Her voice dropped. They don't stop until they get what they want. And what do they want? Nolan whispered. Ava looked him in the eyes. Money, freedom, each other, and for you, out of their way. The words settled like ice across Nolan's skin. He exhaled slowly, a controlled breath that felt like the first real inhale of a man returning to life after nearly drowning. I'm done being in their way, he said, but I won't confront them. Not yet. Ava nodded. Good, because the moment they suspect you know something, they'll strike. Nolan didn't flinch. They already struck, he said. Now it's my turn. Ava hesitated, then pressed something into his hand, a USB drive. This has copies of the medication logs I could access, timestamps, the changes, the forged signatures. It's not everything, but it's a start. Nolan closed his hand around it like a lifeline. Thank you. Ava stepped back, her expression softening. Your mother cared about you more than anything. She wanted you to live a life free from the people who use your kindness against you. Nolan blinked slowly, shoulders heavy yet steadier than they had felt in weeks. She tried to warn me. I didn't listen. You're listening now, Ava whispered. She turned to leave, disappearing into the shadows. Nolan stood alone in the cold parking lot, staring at the hospital that had become both sanctuary and graveyard. He looked down at the USB drive, then at the distant glow of the city, then at his car. His life had been dismantled piece by piece, but now he finally understood the shape of the hands that had done it. He wouldn't confront Selena. He wouldn't confront Marcus, not until he had every piece of the truth, not until they realized too late that the man they thought they had destroyed was still standing and coming for answers. Nolan didn't return home right away. Something in him refused to walk back into that house, carrying another truth he wasn't ready to face alone. Instead, he drove without direction through the quiet, sleeping town, passing shuttered shops, empty sidewalks, streetlights casting long orange shadows over the asphalt. He needed the motion, the hum of the engine, the illusion that he was moving forward even as his thoughts spiraled behind him. Ava's words replayed in his mind, looping like a cruel echo. Your mother didn't deteriorate naturally. Someone forged the orders. Your wife was in the room that night. You weren't supposed to know. Each line collided with the next, forming an avalanche of meaning he couldn't outrun. Betrayal had a shape now. It had a timeline. It had names. Selena, Marcus. The very people who were supposed to be his shelter had become the architects of his destruction. Near midnight, he finally pulled into the driveway of his mother's house. He didn't want to be near the home he had shared with Selena, not with the scent of her perfume still lingering in the sheets, not with the memories of Marcus laughing in the living room, pretending to be family. Eleanor's house was quiet, dark, familiar in a way that steadied him. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let the silence wrap around him, The place felt suspended in time, frozen in the exact moment before her last hospital admission. Her knitting basket remained beside the recliner. A stack of her books sat on the coffee table. A teacup still lay upside down near the sink. He gently touched the edge of it, as if expecting her warmth to linger. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered into the dark. "I should have been here. I should have seen them for who they were." He closed his eyes. The grief wasn't gentle. It was jagged, serrated, slicing through him with every breath. But beneath it, a slow-burning ember of clarity pulsed. He would not let her be a footnote in their scheme. He paced the living room until the adrenaline finally pushed him to sit at the dining table. He placed the USB drive Ava had given him beside the ledger from the attic. 2 pieces of a puzzle he was now determined to assemble. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. A text from an unknown number again. "Saw your car at the hospital. Everything okay?" Nolan's pulse spiked. Selena. It had to be. He didn't answer. A second message arrived. "We need to talk tomorrow. It's important." The audacity of her calmness made Nolan's hands shake. He deleted the message and turned his phone off. He wasn't talking to Selena. Not now. Not until he knew everything. He stayed awake through most of the night, combing through the ledger entries again and again, until he could almost hear Eleanor's voice between the lines. Around 4 in the morning, exhaustion finally pulled him into a light, uneasy sleep on the couch. He dreamt of heavy footsteps, whispering voices, Selena's cold smile. He woke up drenched in sweat. By mid-morning, sunlight streamed faintly through the curtains, turning dust particles into floating embers. Nolan made himself a cup of coffee, bitter and burnt, but he needed the caffeine and sat down with the ledger once more. He noticed something he hadn't before, a pattern in the dates. Transfers, medication changes, and unannounced visits from Selena and Marcus, all lined up in the 2 weeks leading to Eleanor's death. It wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It was methodical. A soft knock startled him from his thoughts. He froze. No one visited Eleanor's house unannounced. He slowly approached the door, heart drumming against his ribs. He opened it a crack. A woman stood outside, tall, composed, dressed in business attire. She carried a sleek leather briefcase and wore a badge clipped to her coat. "Nolan Reyes?" she asked politely. "Yes," he answered, wary. "I'm Claire Park. I'm an investigator with the county's Elder Care Oversight Division." Nolan's breath caught. "You're here because of the complaint I filed." But he hadn't filed one. "Not yet," Claire shook her head. "I'm here because someone else filed one on your behalf, an anonymous whistleblower. The complaint included concerns about forged medical orders, suspicious financial transactions, and potential coercion involving your mother's care." A chill ran down Nolan's spine. Anonymous? Was it Ava? Claire's expression didn't change. "I can't disclose that." But Nolan saw the truth in her steady gaze. Ava wasn't just helping quietly anymore. She was risking everything. "May I come in?" Claire asked. "I'd like to hear your account." Nolan stepped aside. "Of course." Claire entered, her eyes sweeping the room with an investigative sharpness that both intimidated and reassured him. She sat at the dining table, opened her briefcase, and took out a voice recorder. "I want to document your statement," she said, "to determine whether there's enough evidence to open a formal inquiry." Nolan nodded slowly. "Ask anything." Claire pressed record. "Tell me everything," she said. He did. He told her about Selena's hostility toward Eleanor, about Marcus's increasing involvement in her care. He described the forged signatures Graham had shown him, the suspicious insurance changes, and the night he found Selena in Eleanor's hospital room outside visiting hours. He recounted Ava's warnings, the medication irregularities, the USB drive. Claire listened silently, rarely blinking, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad. When he finished, Claire clicked off the recorder but didn't speak right away. Finally, she said, "This is serious, Nolan. Very serious. If what you're saying is accurate, it suggests a coordinated effort to exploit a vulnerable patient for financial gain." Nolan stared at the table. You think they killed her? We don't use that language without proof, Claire said firmly. But something improper happened. The medication changes alone warrant immediate review. He exhaled shakily. What happens now? We open an investigation, she said. But you need to understand something. If your wife and Marcus realize they're being looked into, they may try to destroy evidence or retaliate against you. Nolan clenched his jaw. I'm not afraid of them anymore. You should be, Claire said softly. People capable of manipulating medical orders aren't predictable. He swallowed. How long will the investigation take? Not long, she said, because Ava wasn't the only one who noticed irregularities. There are others willing to talk, and the medication logs may still contain digital fingerprints. A spark of hope, real, tangible hope flared inside Nolan. But there's something else I need you to know, Claire continued. 2 days ago, your wife visited the county office. She attempted to update some of your mother's beneficiary information retroactively. Nolan stared at her, stunned. Retroactively? That's illegal. Yes, Claire said. And when she was told the records were frozen, pending review, she became agitated. Nolan rubbed his forehead. Of course she did. Claire leaned forward. Nolan, I need you to stay somewhere safe, somewhere she and Marcus don't expect you to be. I'm staying here, he said, at my mother's house. That may be wise, Claire nodded. Familiarity helps people feel grounded, but be careful who you open the door to. Nolan felt a tremor run through him. You think they might come here? I think, Claire said gently, that people who feel cornered can act irrationally. A silence fell over them. Finally, Claire packed her briefcase. I'll be in touch. In the meantime, gather everything: documents, recordings, messages. We may need it all. She paused at the door. And Nolan, I'm sorry. No one should experience this kind of betrayal. When she left, Nolan stood alone in the quiet house. The weight of the coming storm, heavy but somehow less terrifying than before. He had allies now. He picked up the USB drive, plugged it into his laptop, and watched as files loaded medication schedules, signature captures, timestamps lining up with the ledger. His mother's final attempt to speak to him was no longer a whisper. It was evidence. His phone buzzed on the table. He turned it on and saw a new message from Selena. Nolan, I'm coming by later. We need to talk about the house. His chest tightened. He typed back one sentence. Don't come here. A pause. Then, you don't get to decide that. Nolan stared at the screen until the text blurred. Then he powered off the phone. For the first time, he wasn't the one retreating. He wasn't the one breaking. The truth was gathering momentum, piece by piece. And soon, very soon, Selena and Marcus would realize the ground beneath them was shifting, and when it collapsed, Nolan would be standing on the other side of it. By the time evening approached, the sky had dimmed into a bruised purple, heavy with clouds, threatening rain. Nolan sat hunched at the small dining table in his mother's house, its wooden surface worn smooth by years of family meals and quiet conversations. In front of him lay the flash drive Ava had given him, the battered ledger Eleanor had kept, and a notebook where he had been scribbling connections, dots, arrows, names, dates. A map of betrayal that grew darker each time he traced it. He kept replaying the visit from Claire Park, her cautious tone, her warning, the way her eyes had softened when she said no one should endure what he had endured. It was the first time in weeks he felt anyone saw him as something other than a grieving son or an abandoned husband. Someone saw him as a victim of something much larger and more sinister. He wasn't sure if that made him feel relieved or terrified. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Nolan reached for the ledger again, running his thumb over the indentation of his mother's handwriting. She had written like someone trying to race time itself, letters uneven, pressure changing mid-sentence. She must have been afraid. She must have felt alone. He swallowed hard. I'm here now, he whispered into the stillness, as if she could hear him. I won't let them erase you. A sudden knock startled him. He froze. 3 short raps, then quiet. His pulse kicked up. He moved slowly toward the window and peeked through the curtain. A woman stood on the porch, small framed, wearing hospital scrubs under a long coat. Her hair was pulled back tightly. She looked exhausted, glancing around nervously. Ava! Nolan exhaled and unlocked the door. Ava slipped inside quickly and shut the door behind her. You came, Nolan said. His voice held both surprise and concern. Ava nodded, wringing her hands. I didn't know where else to go. I think someone saw me talking to you last night. A cold spike shot through Nolan's chest. Who? I'm not sure, Ava said, stepping deeper into the room. But someone followed me to the parking area this morning. When I turned around, they were gone. Nolan clenched his jaw. You shouldn't be here if you're not safe. Ava shook her head. No, I came because you need to see something. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small voice recorder. This belonged to one of the rotating nurses. Ava explained. She used it to take verbal notes during shifts. Last week, she accidentally recorded a conversation she overheard outside Eleanor's room. Nolan's breath hitched. A conversation between who? Ava hesitated. Selena and Marcus. Nolan's stomach plummeted. Are you sure? Yes, Ava whispered. You should listen. She placed the recorder on the table and hit play. Static buzzed, a few muffled voices. Then, Selena's voice, sharp and impatient. She won't sign it. She said she wants Nolan to handle everything. Marcus's voice followed, tense. Then push harder. She's barely conscious half the time anyway. Nolan's heart stopped. His fingers curled into fists. Selena again, low and furious. She keeps asking for Nolan. If he shows up and sees the forms, he'll ask questions. Marcus scoffed. Then make sure he's not here. You know how to distract him. Ava's eyes flicked toward Nolan. His face had gone pale, his breath ragged. Selena whispered next, the recording barely catching it. If she doesn't sign, the policy won't hold. Everything depends on this. I'm not losing my future because of some stubborn old woman. Nolan tasted iron. His entire body trembled. Marcus replied, We don't have much time. She's declining faster than expected. Just get it done. Static overtook the recording, then silence. Ava stopped the playback. The room felt impossibly small, suffocating. Nolan pressed his palms into his eyes, struggling to hold himself together. They were forcing her. They were trying to manipulate my mother while she was dying. Ava nodded slowly and pushing for signatures on documents she didn't understand. Nolan sat heavily in the chair. This is proof. It's real proof. Ava placed a hand on the table near his. It's not everything, but it's enough to open an official review, enough to involve law enforcement if the investigation finds cause. Nolan lifted his head, eyes burning. Why did the nurse give this to you? She was scared, Ava whispered, of losing her job, of being dragged into something dangerous, but she also didn't want the truth buried. The words struck him deeply. They took advantage of her, Nolan murmured. They took advantage of my mother, of the system, of me. Ava didn't speak. She didn't need to. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows. Nolan flinched. Ava looked around nervously. I should go before anyone notices I'm gone. No, Nolan said quickly. You shouldn't go alone. What if someone is watching you? Ava hesitated. You can't protect me, Nolan. You can barely protect yourself right now. Her honesty stung. But she was right. I'll take a different route home, she said, pulling her hood up. Don't contact me on your phone. Assume everything is being watched. Nolan felt a chill. Watched. By who? Ava paused at the door. People who forge medical orders don't work alone, and they don't leave loose ends. When she left, Nolan bolted the door and pressed his back against it, lungs heaving. He looked at the ledger again, at the flash drive, at the recorder. The truth was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. He listened to the recording again, gripping the device like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. Each word felt like a blade, carving into the last remnants of hope that Selena or Marcus had ever been capable of love. His hands shook uncontrollably by the end. He forced himself to breathe, to think, to push through the tide of rage rising inside him. He gathered everything, the ledger, the flash drive, the recorder, and placed them into a folder. He could feel a shift inside himself. A pivot. This wasn't grief anymore. This wasn't confusion or disbelief or heartbreak. This was evidence. This was motive. This was motive disguised as love and masked by betrayal. He rose from the table. He needed to go somewhere, to do something. He needed to speak with Graham Lockwood. Nolan grabbed his coat, folder in hand, and stepped outside. The wind had picked up, tugging at the edges of the night. He locked the door and hurried to his car, glancing over his shoulder once, twice. No shadow moved, no car idled nearby, but he couldn't shake the feeling someone was watching. The drive to Graham's office felt longer than usual. Each passing street lamp sliced the darkness into flashes. Light, shadow, light, shadow. By the time he arrived, his nerves buzzed like frayed wires. Graham met him at the entrance with lines etched deep in his forehead. You sounded urgent. What happened? Inside the office, Nolan placed the folder on the desk. This, he said quietly, this happened. He explained everything, the recording, Ava's warning, Claire's visit. Graham listened with a level of intensity Nolan had never seen from him. When the recording played, Graham went still. This is incriminating, Graham murmured. Very incriminating. Nolan felt his knees weaken. So what do we do? Graham locked the door and lowered his voice. We bring in Daniel Price, the private investigator I mentioned. He'll know how to handle this quietly and professionally. Nolan nodded slowly. And after that, Graham said, we pursue justice, carefully. Nolan exhaled, his breath shaking. What if they know I'm onto them? He asked. Graham held his gaze. Then you must prepare yourself. People like this, people willing to manipulate the dying, are unpredictable when cornered. The words lingered in the dim office light. Nolan tightened his grip on the folder. For the first time in weeks, his grief no longer felt like drowning. It felt like fuel, and he wasn't going to stop until the truth surfaced, no matter how deep it was buried. The next morning arrived with a pale, gray sun, struggling to break through dense clouds, an anemic daylight that seemed to match Nolan's internal landscape. He stood outside Graham Lockwood's office, the wind prickling at his face as he replayed every word from Ava's recording. It sat heavy in his coat pocket, like a pulse of its own. When he finally stepped inside, Graham was already waiting with another man. The stranger stood from his chair, early 40s, sharp jawline, dark hair streaked with early silver. He wore a charcoal suit that didn't quite conceal the hardened edge of someone accustomed to confrontation. His eyes were observant, calculating, but not unkind. Nolan, Graham said, motioning him forward. This is Daniel Price. Daniel extended a firm hand. I've been briefed on the situation. I'm sorry for your loss, and for everything that followed. Nolan shook his hand. Thank you. I appreciate you being here. Daniel looked at him for a lingering moment. As if assessing Nolan's resolve, Graham didn't exaggerate. This is serious. Very serious. Cases involving elder exploitation and medical tampering are complicated. People hide their tracks well, but they also make mistakes. Nolan sat, the folder of evidence beside him. I want the truth. Whatever it takes. Daniel nodded once. Then let's get to work. He opened a slim laptop and a leather-bound notebook. Tell me everything in your own words, not just the facts, the feelings, interactions, things that seemed off, even before your mother's illness escalated. Nolan exhaled slowly and began recounting it all. The tension between Eleanor and Selena, Marcus's sudden involvement, the late-night visits, the forged signatures, the insurance changes. He described the recording from Ava, the ledger from the attic, and the unshakable pattern that had emerged. Daniel's pen scratched across the page at intervals, his face unreadable. When Nolan finished, Daniel closed the notebook carefully. First, Daniel said, you need to understand just how calculated this appears. Your mother had assets, house, pension, savings. That gave motive. Her declining health provided opportunity, and your wife's position as next of kin granted access. Nolan swallowed hard. Hearing it framed so plainly made his skin crawl. Daniel continued. Second, people don't forge medical orders unless they're confident no one will question it, which means someone was covering their tracks, possibly more than one person. Marcus? Nolan asked, though he already knew the answer. Likely, Daniel said, but whether he forged anything himself or just benefited from it remains to be seen. Graham leaned forward. With the recording and ledger, we have the beginning of a case, but we need verifiable links, financial records, hospital access logs, communication trails. Daniel tapped his pen thoughtfully. Which is where I come in, Nolan nodded. What do you need from me? Everything you have, Daniel said. Not just documents your phone. If you're willing, any messages, call logs, financial apps, anything that might show patterns. Nolan hesitated for only a second before sliding his phone across the table. Take it. Daniel accepted it. Good. Now, tell me about Selena. Her routines, her habits, her relationship with your mother in the months leading up to her death. Nolan's throat tightened. She didn't like my mom. She saw her as an obstacle, someone who kept me grounded, someone who saw through her. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Did she ever express resentment openly? Yes, quietly, subtly. She'd make comments about Eleanor being old-fashioned or overly involved. She hated how close we were. And Marcus? Daniel prodded gently. Nolan's hands curled into fists. Marcus knew everything about me, every weakness, every vulnerability. He used to say Eleanor was like a second mother to him, but lately, he swallowed. He visited her, without me there, a lot. I didn't think anything of it. Because you trusted him, Daniel finished quietly. Nolan looked away, stupidly. Daniel leaned back, assessing the room. No, not stupidly. People who do this, people like your wife and Marcus, they target trust. It's their weapon. Graham cleared his throat. I agree. And Nolan shouldn't shoulder blame here. His mother sensed something long before he did. Nolan pulled the ledger from his coat and placed it on the table. She tried to warn me. I just wasn't listening. Daniel opened the ledger and studied the entries carefully. This is huge. It's essentially your mother's testimony, dates, notations, suspicion. Combined with the forged signatures and the recording, this is a trifecta of evidence. His eyes narrowed. But we still need to prove malpractice or intentional manipulation. How? Nolan asked. Everything feels like it's just smoke and shadows. Daniel flipped open his laptop. With digital footprints, hospital systems track every access to patient files, every change to medication orders, every login, every log out. Nolan's heartbeat quickened. So whoever falsified the orders left a trail, Daniel finished, even if they thought they erased it. Graham looked relieved. Good. Then what's our next step? Daniel stood. We go to the hospital, quietly. I have a contact in IT who owes me a favor. If anyone tampered with Eleanor's file, we'll find it. Nolan's breath caught. Tonight. Yes, Daniel said. Before anyone realizes you're pushing for answers, a flicker of dread passed through Nolan. What if Selena or Marcus are watching me? What if they already know? Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. Then the best thing you can do is stay unpredictable. They left Graham's office together in Daniel's black car, a sleek vehicle with tinted windows and an engine that purred more like a warning than transportation. Nolan stared out the window as familiar places blurred past him. The cafe, where Selena used to laugh, the park where he and Marcus met as kids, the streets where Eleanor used to walk him to school, all of them felt contaminated, now infected by memories he no longer trusted. The hospital parking lot came into view, eerily familiar, yet suffocating in new ways. Daniel parked in a restricted area near the staff entrance. "Stay close," Daniel said, "and let me handle the talking." Inside, the hospital was quieter than usual. A lull between shifts. The fluorescent lights washed everything in stark, unflattering brightness. As they walked toward the administrative wing, Nolan felt his breath catch. He could almost see Eleanor's figure moving ahead of him, leaning on her walker, smiling through pain. But the hallway was empty, and she was gone. Daniel led him to a small office labeled IT Systems and Security. He knocked twice. A man in his late 30s, with tired eyes and a coffee-stained shirt, opened the door. "Dan, haven't seen you in years. What's going on?" "Need a favor, Eli," Daniel said. "A big one." Eli glanced at Nolan, then back at Daniel. "This looks serious." "It is," Daniel replied. "We need access logs for patient Eleanor Reyes. The last 3 months. Eli hesitated. "That's risky. Those logs are protected, and I'll owe you," Daniel said evenly. "Big." Eli weighed the moment, then stepped aside. "Fine. Come in." The office was cluttered with monitors, cables, and stacks of outdated equipment. Eli sat at his desk and cracked his knuckles before typing rapidly. "Tell me when," he murmured. Daniel leaned over his shoulder. "Start around 6 weeks before her death." Lines of code scrolled across the screen. Then entry after entry, the access history appeared. Eli frowned. "This is odd." "What?" Daniel asked. "Her files were accessed far more frequently than protocol allows." "By who?" Nolan asked, voice trembling. Eli zoomed in. A list of names populated the screen. Doctors, nurses, standard. Then, Selena Ward. Authorized family access. Marcus Hale. Authorized family access. Nolan gasped. They accessed her file. "More than that," Eli said. "They changed entries." He clicked deeper into the logs. There it was. Multiple medication adjustments, signature mismatches, dose increases, unauthorized overrides. Daniel went rigid. They logged changes from user accounts they shouldn't have had access to. "Meaning," Nolan whispered, "meaning someone used hospital credentials likely stolen or coerced to falsify Eleanor's medical orders." Avadiest. The screen filled with timestamps matching Eleanor's sudden decline. Nolan felt his knees weaken. Daniel caught his arm. "This is it," Daniel said. "This is the breakthrough." Eli looked pale. "Dan, if anyone finds out I pulled these logs—" "They won't," Daniel assured him. "You'll be protected." Nolan stared at the glowing monitor. His mother hadn't died of her illness. She had died of someone else's intent. Daniel placed a firm, steady hand on Nolan's shoulder. "We're almost there," Nolan exhaled shakily. "Now," Daniel said, "we prove motive, and we bring them down." Nolan didn't sleep that night, not even for a moment. He sat in the living room of his mother's house. The printed access logs spread out on the coffee table like pieces of a crime scene. Each timestamp glared up at him, evidence of intrusion, manipulation, and calculated cruelty. Selena's name, Marcus's name, forged signatures, unauthorized access, medication changes. Every line confirmed what he had feared yet refused to believe. The two people he trusted most had been tampering with Eleanor's care. His grief twisted into something heavier. Not just sorrow, not just betrayal, but a rising, razor-edged determination. He didn't know when dawn broke. The gray light simply seeped into the living room like fog, revealing the exhaustion etched into his face. Nolan rubbed both hands over his eyes. Today, Daniel would begin gathering sworn statements from hospital staff. Today, they would prepare to present evidence to authorities. Today, Selena would learn that the truth she buried was clawing its way back to the surface. Nolan just hoped he was ready. Around 9, a knock echoed through the house. Nolan stiffened immediately. His heart punched his ribs. He checked the peephole. "Graham." He exhaled with relief and opened the door. "You look exhausted," Graham said, stepping inside. "Did you get any sleep at all?" "No," Nolan replied honestly. I don't think I can sleep until this is over, Graham nodded, sympathy softening his features. Daniel has been combing through the logs we pulled last night, and the recording from Ava. It's damning. We need to talk strategy. They moved to the dining table, the same place where Eleanor once served pancakes on Sunday mornings. Now it held folders, printouts, USB drives, every scrap of truth they could gather. Nolan, Graham began gently, what we have is substantial. Enough to warrant an official investigation. Enough to file an injunction to freeze your mother's accounts. But I need you to understand, this will escalate quickly. Selena and Marcus will realize someone is building a case against them. Nolan's jaw tensed. They already suspect something. Selena texted me yesterday, insisting she needed to come by. Graham frowned. You didn't let her, did you? No, Nolan said. I told her not to come. Graham looked relieved. Good. Keep distance. At this point, any confrontation could be dangerous. Nolan swallowed. Dangerous for whom? For you, Graham said quietly. People who forge medical documents and manipulate a dying woman's care. They don't think about consequences. They think about gain. And they panic when they're cornered. Nolan had already begun to understand that, Graham continued. Daniel told me he found traces of access to your mother's insurance portal from an IP address tied to Marcus's business. If that's confirmed, it proves collusion. Nolan felt tension coil in his chest. So, what's next? We bring this to law enforcement, Graham said. But Daniel wants to gather one more piece of evidence, something solid that ties Selena directly to fraud. A shiver ran down Nolan's spine. What does he need? A motive on paper, Graham said. Access to the insurance policy, perhaps correspondence or applications your mother never authorized. Nolan nodded slowly. I can get into my mother's email. She stored everything there. Good, Graham said. Check for password changes. You may find more signs of tampering. Before Nolan could respond, another knock broke the fragile calm. He and Graham exchanged a tense glance. Nolan approached the door quietly and peered through the peephole. His blood ran cold. Selena. Her hair was perfectly styled, makeup immaculate, dressed in a blazer and fitted slacks, as if she had just stepped out of a meeting. As if nothing in the world was wrong, she held her purse with one hand and knocked again, more insistent this time. Nolan. Her voice drifted through the door, smooth and confident. I know you're home. Open up. Graham approached quickly. Do not let her inside. I won't, Nolan whispered. Selena knocked again, harder. We need to talk. You can't keep avoiding me. Nolan inhaled, steadied himself, and cracked open the door just an inch enough to be heard, not enough for her to see inside. What do you want, Selena? Her brows rose with feigned surprise. What do I want, Nolan? I'm your wife. Or, we were married. We have things to resolve. Dividends of get aggressed. You resolved it when you served me divorce papers the night my mother died, Nolan said flatly. Selena's expression flickered annoyance, cutting briefly through her mask. Nolan, don't be dramatic. We made choices. It's time you accept them. Behind the door, Graham crossed his arms, listening. Selena continued. Marcus and I are trying to move forward. We need access to the house to gather my belongings, and I need you to sign a few financial documents. Nolan's pulse spiked. Financial documents? What documents? Selena smiled. Sweet, poisonous, just routine things. Transfers, settlements, insurance closures. Nolan's stomach lurched. Insurance? You're not getting anything from me, Nolan said. Selena's eyes narrowed. Nolan, I'm trying to be civil, but if you refuse to cooperate, you'll complicate everything. Graham leaned close and whispered, Close the door. Nolan didn't. Instead, he stared straight at her. What did you do to my mother? Selena's entire body went still. What? She said sharply. You heard me, Nolan said, voice steadier than he felt. What did you and Marcus do to her? Selena laughed. A soft, disbelieving laugh layered with mockery. You're losing it. You must be stressed. You should talk to someone. I talked to someone, Nolan said. Multiple someones, doctors, nurses, investigators. A shadow crossed her face. Nolan, she hissed in a low voice. You don't know what you're talking about. Then why are you afraid? He countered. Her jaw clenched. Open this door? No. Selena leaned in, her expression now venomous. If you think you can accuse me of something, anything, you're mistaken. You have no idea what kind of trouble you'll bring on yourself. Leave, Nolan said. Selena stared at him for a long, dangerous moment. Then, her expression shifted into something cold, calculated. This isn't over, she whispered. Not even close. She turned and walked down the steps, heels clicking with clipped rage. When her car disappeared from the street, Nolan let out a breath that had been trapped in his chest. Graham pulled him back from the door. That was risky. I needed to see her reaction. And now you've seen it, Graham said firmly. She's rattled. That means she knows something is unraveling. Nolan nodded, swallowing hard. Good. They returned to the table, both silent for a moment. Then Nolan spoke. Let's keep going. For the next several hours. Nolan and Graham sifted through Eleanor's online accounts. Email, banking history, insurance portals. Some passwords worked. Others had been changed recently. Look at this, Graham said, pointing at a timestamp. Someone tried to reset her insurance password 2 days before she died. Nolan's breath hitched. Who? The recovery email was changed to an account we don't recognize. Marcus, Nolan whispered. It's possible. They cross-referenced entries, matched timestamps, compared financial inconsistencies. Piece by piece, Selena and Marcus's scheme took shape. It made Nolan sick. By afternoon, Daniel had returned with news. He entered Eleanor's house briskly, closing the door behind him. We have witnesses, he announced. 2 nurses and 1 resident doctor are willing to give statements. They noticed inconsistencies in the medication orders, and they remember Selena arguing with Eleanor about signing documents. Nolan exhaled sharply. So we have testimony. And access logs, Daniel added. And financial transfers, and a recorded conversation. Graham looked at Nolan. This is enough for law enforcement to take action. Nolan nodded. But Daniel held up a hand. Before we go to them, I need one more thing. One that ties everything together. What is it? Nolan asked. Proof that Selena or Marcus directly benefited financially from Eleanor's death. Nolan hesitated. The insurance policy. Yes, Daniel interrupted. But I want tangible evidence. Bank transfers. Account changes. Something that leaves no room for interpretation. Nolan stood. I know where her documents are. He led them to Eleanor's bedroom, quiet, untouched. He reached beneath the bed and pulled out her locked metal file box. With the key from the attic, he opened it. Inside were folders labeled neatly, in his mother's handwriting, bills, medical records, insurance, investments. Nolan flipped through until he found the insurance folder. As he opened it, a single sheet slid out, fresh, crisp, out of place, among the older documents. Daniel picked it up. It was a beneficiary change form, dated 1 week before Eleanor's death, listing Selena Ward as the secondary beneficiary, but the signature at the bottom, even without forensic training, was clearly forged. Daniel let out a slow, controlled breath. This is it, Graham nodded. This ties motive, opportunity, and execution. Nolan stared at the forged signature, his mother's name mangled into something monstrous. He whispered, She didn't go quietly. She left me breadcrumbs. Daniel placed a steady hand on Nolan's shoulder, and you followed them. For the first time since Eleanor's death, Nolan felt something shift inside him. Not pain, not despair, not rage, purpose. We take this to law enforcement, Daniel said, gathering the files. Tonight, Nolan nodded. Tonight, he said, we begin. Nolan had never been inside the county justice building after dark. The lobby felt cavernous, the fluorescent lights too bright against the emptiness. Every footstep echoed as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. He walked beside Graham and Daniel, clutching the folder of evidence so tightly that the edges curled under his fingertips. A part of him felt like an intruder in his own life, like he was stepping into someone else's story, someone braver, someone smarter. But the truth anchored him. He wasn't here because he was fearless, he was here because he had no choice. Daniel led them down a quiet hallway toward the investigative division. Through a glass-paneled door, a woman in her 40s sat reviewing reports. Her posture was disciplined, her eyes sharp even from a distance. Detective Karen Holt. Daniel knocked lightly. She looked up, recognized him immediately, and stood. "Daniel Price," she said, extending a hand. "It's been a while." Daniel shook her hand firmly. "Karen, thanks for agreeing to this after hours." Karen's gaze moved to Nolan, reading him like an open file. "And you must be Mr. Reyes." Nolan nodded. "Thank you for meeting us." Karen gestured toward the table. Daniel said it was urgent. "Sit. Show me what you have." What followed felt like peeling back the skin on a wound that had never healed. Graham placed the ledger first. Nolan watched Karen's expression shift as she skimmed the entries. Each line, a tremor of worry, fear, suspicion. Then the recorded conversation between Selena and Marcus. Karen's eyes narrowed. This sounds like coercion, possibly conspiracy. Daniel then presented the medication access logs. Karen leaned closer, her jaw tightening as she traced the forged signatures. "Unauthorized changes to medication orders," she said. "Forged physician signatures. Access by individuals without clearance. This isn't malpractice. This is tampering." Nolan felt a cold tremor in his chest. Finally, Daniel handed her the insurance beneficiary change. The one with the forged signature Eleanor never gave. Karen stared at it for a long moment. "This alone," she said quietly, "is enough to open a formal probe into insurance fraud." She placed the papers down slowly, deliberately, combined with the recording and the medical tampering logs. She looked up at Nolan. "This is criminal, Mr. Reyes. Potentially multiple felonies, fraud, identity forgery, medical tampering with possible fatal consequences." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Nolan swallowed. "So, what happens now?" Karen folded her hands. "We'll open an official case. But before we move, I need sworn statements from all witnesses. Ava Collins, the resident doctor, and any other staff who noticed irregularities." "She can get them," Daniel said confidently. Karen nodded. "Good. And we'll need to secure medical files directly from the hospital database. The sooner, the better." Nolan exhaled shakily. "And Selena? And Marcus?" Karen's expression stayed firm. "They won't know anything until we're ready. But you should be careful. When people know they're about to lose everything, they get unpredictable." Nolan thought of Selena's cold stare at the door, the warning in her voice, the venom beneath her calm. "She already suspects something," he admitted. Karen tilted her head. "What makes you say that?" "She came to the house earlier," Nolan explained, "demanding I sign financial documents. When I refused to open the door, she got angry. Not emotional, angry." Daniel muttered under his breath. "That fits the pattern." Karen tapped a pen against the table. "You need to stay somewhere secure." Nolan stiffened. "I'm not running. This is my mother's house." Karen studied him, then nodded. "Fine, but lock everything. Don't be alone outside. And if any car follows you, call us immediately." Nolan nodded. Karen stood. "Daniel, you and Graham begin compiling everything into a case file. Nolan, go home. Rest. Tomorrow, we move." Rest. The word sounded foreign, impossible. Still, Nolan returned to his mother's house, though the world outside felt sharper than before. Every passing car made his shoulders tense. Every creak of the old wood beneath his feet sounded like an intrusion. He closed the curtains, locked the doors, double-checked the windows, then sat alone in the living room, staring at the shadows that clung to the corners. This house, his mother's sanctuary, was now a bunker. His mind wouldn't quiet. Fragmented memories kept surfacing. Eleanor's tired smile, Selena's tightening jaw, Marcus whispering at the hospital, the forged signatures, the altered prescriptions, the wedding invitation printed before Eleanor had even been gone a day. They weren't coincidences. They were threads of a single web. Around midnight, exhaustion finally pulled Nolan into a fitful sleep. He slumped on the couch, the folder of evidence beside him. He didn't hear the first sound, a soft scratch, barely audible. He didn't hear the second one either, a quiet shift near the window. But the third sound, a muffled thud, snapped him awake. Nolan jolted upright, heart hammering. He listened. Silence. He rose slowly, moving through the shadows of the living room. He reached for his phone. Before he could turn on the flashlight, a car engine roared outside, then peeled away down the street. Nolan rushed to the window and pulled back the curtain just in time to see taillights disappearing into the night. His blood went cold. Someone had been here, watching, testing the boundaries. He locked every bolt again and paced until dawn, adrenaline the only thing keeping him upright. When morning light finally broke through the gray, Nolan drove straight back to Graham's office. Daniel was already inside, spreading more documents across the table. "I had the hospital analyst dig deeper into the system logs," Daniel said. "We found attempts to delete access history. Someone tried to wipe the trail, but they weren't thorough." Nolan's chest tightened. "Who?" "Look here." Daniel pointed to a username. "Hale. M." Nolan stared. "Marcus tried to delete the records." Daniel nodded grimly. "Which means he knows the walls are closing in, and he's panicking." Nolan rubbed his temples. "What about Selena?" Graham answered. "This time, she visited the insurance office again this morning." Nolan's stomach dropped. "She's trying again." "Yes," Graham said, and she was visibly distressed when told the documents were frozen. She demanded meetings. She made threats. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "They're unraveling. The more desperate they get, the more mistakes they'll make." Nolan exhaled shakily. "How soon until Detective Holt moves?" "Soon," Daniel said. "Very soon." Nolan nodded, though every muscle in his body felt coiled. But Daniel wasn't finished. "There's one more development," he said slowly. "Marcus's consulting business. The shell company receiving funds from your mother." Nolan looked up. "What about it? It's not just inactive." Daniel said, "It has exactly one major transaction besides your mother's transfers." Nolan felt dread crawl up his spine. "From who?" Daniel slid a printed page across the table. Nolan stared. The transfer was from an account belonging to Selena Ward. What does that mean?" Nolan whispered. Daniel's expression turned dark. "It means," he said, "Selena and Marcus weren't just having an affair. They were partners, in business, in fraud, and possibly in murder." The room fell silent. Nolan gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. Everything he knew about love, marriage, friendship, every foundation of his life had been a lie, built on the suffering of the one person who had always protected him. He wasn't just seeking justice now, he was seeking truth. And truth always demanded a price. "We bring this to Holt tonight," Daniel said, standing. "By tomorrow morning, Selena and Marcus won't be smiling at wedding venues. They'll be answering questions under oath." Nolan nodded slowly. For the first time, he felt something close to strength, not the kind that shouts, the kind that endures, the kind that rises from devastation with purpose. He was ready, even if the storm ahead was darker than anything he'd faced so far. The hearing room wasn't a courtroom. Not yet, but it felt like one. A long, rectangular table sat at the center, flanked by chairs that somehow managed to look both inexpensive and intimidating. A panel of 3 officials from the county's Elder Care Oversight Division waited near the far wall, reviewing documents, murmuring to one another in hushed professional tones. Detective Karen Holt was stationed near the corner with a laptop and a thick binder labeled Re-Is Investigation. Nolan stood just outside the doorway, pulse furious in his ears. He had barely slept. Even the weight of the evidence folder under his arm felt foreign, as if belonging to someone else's life. But when the bailiff, an older man with a calm demeanor, gave him a nod, Nolan forced himself forward. Graham and Daniel flanked him like anchors. "Remember," Graham whispered, "just tell the truth. The evidence will speak for you." Nolan nodded, even though confidence was something he hadn't tasted in weeks. Across the room, seated together in crisp, polished confidence, were Selena and Marcus. Selena wore a navy suit, hair sleek and perfectly controlled, makeup flawless. She didn't look like a widow-in-law or a grieving former wife. She looked like she had come prepared to win. Marcus wore a tailored gray jacket, hands clasped loosely on the table, a mask of concern on his face, but his eyes betrayed a hardness Nolan had never seen before. They flicked up at Nolan only briefly, and in them he saw something alarming. Fear, camouflaged deeply. But there, this proceeding will review allegations of financial fraud, medical tampering, and undue influence, the lead panelist announced. "We are not determining criminal guilt today, that is for law enforcement. We are assessing whether the evidence warrants immediate escalation." Selena leaned forward, her voice smooth. "We're happy to cooperate. This entire situation is a misunderstanding driven by grief." Nolan clenched his jaw. Detective Holt stood. "Before testimonies begin, I will summarize key findings." She opened the binder. A patient, Nolan Reyes, experienced sudden and unexplained deterioration. Her medication orders were modified without authorization. Access logs show entries from non-medical personnel, including Selena Ward and Marcus Hale. Selena immediately raised her hand. "I had permission from my husband to view his mother's records. He was overwhelmed with her care. I stepped in to help." Nolan stared at her, stunned by how easily the lie flowed from her lips. Holt's expression did not change. "Even if you had viewing rights, Ms. Ward, that does not grant the ability to edit files." Selena's smile tightened, but she didn't respond. Holt continued, "We also have a recording." She tapped the small device on the table, in which Ms. Ward and Mr. Hale discuss pressuring the patient to sign legal documents. Marcus shifted in his seat. "Those were taken out of context." The panelist raised an eyebrow. "We have the full recording. The context is damning." Nolan's heart pounded so loudly, he could feel the chair vibrating beneath him. It was time. The lead panelist turned to him. "Mr. Reyes, please begin your testimony." Nolan stood, palms damp, throat tight. He looked down at the table, then at the officials, then hesitating at his mother's empty seat in his memory. He inhaled slowly. "My mother was the strongest person I knew," he began. "She didn't trust people easily. When she started writing in her ledger when she pulled away, I didn't understand. I thought it was stress. I trusted my wife. I trusted my best friend." His voice cracked, but he steadied it. "But I was wrong." He explained everything. Selena's visits, Marcus's unexplained presence, the forged signatures, the medication changes. As he spoke, something shifted inside him. Not anger, not grief. Truth. Truth. Finally finding a place to land. When he finished, the room was silent. Selena broke that silence with a scoff. "He's delusional. He's lashing out because I left him, because he can't handle that I fell in love with someone who actually understands me." Nolan closed his eyes. There it was, the cruelty that had blindsided him so many times, now laid bare for strangers to see. Marcus added, voice deceptively calm, "Nolan has been unstable since Eleanor died. He accused us of horrible things with no proof." Daniel leaned forward. "Actually," Holt raised a hand to stop him, "we have proof, and we will present it." She clicked her laptop. The large monitor on the wall lit up. Exhibit A. Access logs. Selena's face stiffened. Rows of data appeared. Timestamps highlighting entries from both Selena and Marcus. Accessing Eleanor's medical file. At times, Nolan was provably absent. "Would either of you like to explain these?" Holt asked. Selena swallowed. "I already told you." "Nolan, let me help." Nolan stepped forward, voice steady. I never gave you permission to access or modify anything. Holt nodded. Noteworthy, Miss Ward, that your access wasn't limited to read-only mode. You manually edited dosage entries. Marcus shifted again. Look, we were just trying to help her. The panelist cut him off. Hospital data does not lie, Mr. Hale. Exhibit B. Forged signature comparisons. Side-by-side analysis of Eleanor's real signature versus the forged beneficiary change appeared on the screen. Selina paled. Ms. Ward, Holt prompted. It's a misunderstanding, Selina tried. Eleanor asked me to help her sign. No. Nolan interrupted. His voice was soft, but every syllable was a blade. My mother never trusted you. She told me so herself. Selina's jaw went sharp. You're lying. Nolan pulled the original letter from his folder, Eleanor's shaky handwriting. People close to you may not have your best interest at heart. He placed it in front of the panel. Selina leaned back, eyes narrowing into slits. Marcus tried to speak again, but his voice cracked. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The room was tilting, but not against Nolan. It was tilting toward truth. Exhibit C. The recording. They played it. Selina's voice filled the room. If she doesn't sign, the policy won't hold. I am not losing my future because of some stubborn old woman. Marcus's reply echoed. Just get it done. Selina visibly blanched, hearing her own words weaponized. Marcus shifted, turning red, then pale. I never meant, Selina started, but Holt silenced her. We do not need your interpretation. The recording speaks for itself. The panelists scribbled notes rapidly. For the first time, Nolan felt something close to hope. Then came the blow he didn't expect. Selina straightened suddenly, her expression changing sharp, calculating, venomous. You think this proves anything? She snapped. You think this is enough to ruin us? Nolan. Tell them the truth. Tell them about your anger issues. Tell them about your breakdowns. Tell them you're unstable. You tried to threaten me the night before the funeral. Nolan froze. The accusation slammed into him like a fist. Detective Holt looked up sharply. Mr. Reyes, is this true? No, Nolan said immediately. Absolutely not. Selina bared her teeth in something between a smile and a snarl. He screamed at me. He threw things. He said he wished I were dead. That's a lie, Nolan's voice broke. I didn't. I wouldn't. But doubt crackled through the room like static. Marcus seized the opportunity. He's been emotionally volatile. He accused us of things that make no sense. Honestly, we're worried about him. The audacity of it ripped something inside Nolan wide open. He stared at his former friend, the person he trusted more than anyone, and saw a stranger, a predator, a liar, a man without a soul. Daniel stood. Detective Holt, we have a witness ready to testify to Nolan's whereabouts at the time she claims. But before he could finish, the door at the back of the room opened. Ava stepped inside, still wearing scrubs, still trembling, but eyes burning with resolve. Detective Holt, she said, I have a sworn statement, and I'm ready to testify now. Selina's head whipped toward the door, her lips parted in horror. Marcus muttered something under his breath low. Panicked, Ava walked straight to the front and placed her written testimony on the table. I was working the night Eleanor Reyes died, and I saw everything, Ava said. Her voice wavered but did not break. Nolan Reyes never threatened anyone, but Selina Ward and Marcus Hale, they had access they should never have had. And they weren't there to comfort her. They were there to pressure her. I heard them. I saw them. And I'm not staying silent anymore. The room erupted, panelists whispering, Holt moving quickly, Selina rising to her feet with a gasp of outrage. You little, Selina spat before Holt cut her off. Ms. Ward, sit down. Nolan watched the collapse of their facade, Selina's perfect mask cracking, Marcus's confidence dissolving into sweat and panic. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like exhaling after drowning underwater. The lead panelist stood. We've heard enough. The evidence warrants immediate referral to law enforcement for criminal investigation. Selena's knees buckled. Marcus closed his eyes. Detective Holt approached Nolan. We'll proceed from here. You did the right thing. Nolan didn't feel triumphant. He felt exhausted, hollow, relieved, and unbearably sad. Because justice, even when served, does not resurrect the dead. It only exposes the darkness that killed them. But today, finally, that darkness had names, and they would no longer hide in the shadows. The police station smelled of old carpet, burnt coffee, and the metallic edge of unresolved tension, the kind that settles in places where truth and danger live side by side. Nolan sat in a small interview room with faded blue walls, hands clasped tightly in his lap, as Detective Holt prepared the paperwork to move the investigation toward formal charges. The events of the hearing replayed in his mind, like flashes of lightning, Selena's lies, Marcus's shifting mask, Ava's trembling voice rising like a lifeline in the storm. He wasn't sure what exhausted him more, the battle itself, or realizing he had been fighting people he once loved. Detective Holt closed the file with a snap. Nolan, this next part isn't easy, but it's necessary. We're preparing to execute warrants for electronic devices, financial records, and personal communications belonging to Ms. Ward and Mr. Hale. Nolan inhaled slowly. Does that mean they'll be arrested? Holt looked at him steadily. It means the evidence is strong enough for us to take the next step. But understand people like them. People who feel cornered, they don't always react predictably. The subtle warning in her voice chilled him. Before he could ask more, Holt's partner, a tall, broad officer named Ruiz, stepped in. We've located both suspects, Ruiz said. They're at Hale's downtown office. Holt nodded. Do it quietly. Pick them up without incident. But Ruiz hesitated. There might be a problem. Marcus's assistant says he's been acting erratic all morning. Selena's been tearing through his office like she expected something to be missing. Nolan's stomach twisted. They know, he whispered. They know the walls are closing in. Holt stood quickly. We move now. The air outside had turned unusually warm despite the overcast sky. Graham and Daniel were waiting for Nolan just outside the station, their expressions tight. What did Holt say? Graham asked. They're making arrests, Nolan said. Daniel nodded sharply. Good. It's time. But Nolan noticed something Daniel rarely displayed: concern, faint but real. What? Nolan asked. What aren't you saying? Daniel exhaled. I've handled cases like this before. When conspirators realize they're caught, they often turn on each other. But sometimes, they lash out at the person they blame for exposing them. Nolan swallowed. Me? Yes, Daniel said. You. A prickling unease crawled across Nolan's skin. Graham added softly. Stay with us until this is over. Don't go anywhere alone. But fate doesn't wait for warnings. Nolan's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text. From an unknown number. Meet me. Urgent. It's about your mother. An address followed an abandoned industrial lot near the river. Nolan went cold. Do not go, Daniel said immediately. This is bait. But it's about my mother. That's exactly why it's bait, Daniel snapped. If someone truly had information, they'd go to the authorities, not lure you to a private location. Nolan knew Daniel was right, but something about the message gnawed at him, not the words, but the familiarity of the number. He had seen it before, somewhere in Eleanor's ledger. The contact number written next to an entry labeled, Change Attempt. Suspicious visitor. His pulse skyrocketed. It's the number that contacted my mother, Nolan said, voice shaking. The person she didn't trust. Daniel's eyes widened. Then it's even more dangerous. You're not going. But Nolan was already moving, something primal and protective taking hold. I have to, he said. If someone else was involved in hurting my mother, if there's one more piece, we can't ignore it. Daniel grabbed his arm. Then I'm coming with you. Graham stepped forward too. You're not going alone. The industrial district sat like a skeleton of the past, abandoned warehouses, rusted steel frames, broken windows staring out like blind eyes. Nolan's car slowed near the location pinned on the map. Daniel followed in his own car, parking close enough to intervene, but giving Nolan space to appear alone. "Stay where I can see you," Daniel instructed through the cracked window. "If anything looks off, I'll move in." Nolan nodded, though his hands trembled as he stepped onto the cracked pavement. The air smelled of oil and damp concrete. A soft wind whistled through metal beams, making the entire place sound alive. He took a few steps forward. "Hello," he called. "If you're here, show yourself." Silence stretched, then footsteps behind him. Nolan spun around. Selena stood several yards away, her hair disheveled, makeup smeared, eyes wide with something between fury and desperation. She looked nothing like the polished woman from the hearing. She looked unhinged. "Nolan," she breathed. "Finally, we need to talk." He staggered back. No, I'm not here for that." "You sent that message." She took a slow step forward. "I needed you to listen to me without them around. Your lawyer, that detective, that nurse, they're poisoning your mind." Daniel stepped partially out of his car, watching carefully, but staying back. "Selena, stop," Nolan said. "It's over. They have the evidence." Her lips twisted. "Evidence? You mean that fake ledger? Those edited logs? Ava's lies?" Every sentence from her mouth felt like acid, corroding the air. "You think I hurt your mother," she hissed. "That I would risk everything for what money? A future with Marcus?" "You already did," Nolan said, voice breaking. "You risked everything for him. For greed? Greed?" She laughed wildly. "Do you have any idea what I gave up to be with you? What I endured? Your mother hated me. She made me feel unwelcome. She tried to sabotage us." "That is not true." "It is," Selena screamed. "And you never defended me. You always chose her." Something snapped inside her. Then her veneer, her pride, her control. "You know what?" she said, voice dropping to a chilling softness. "She wasn't supposed to die. Not then. She was just supposed to be scared enough to sign the papers. But she fought and fought, and I got tired of waiting." Nolan's breath vanished. "You killed her," he whispered. "You're admitting it." She blinked, startled by her own words, but then steadied herself. "I did what I had to do. You don't understand Marcus and I. We were meant to be free. We were meant to build a life without your mother's interference." Nolan's vision blurred. He felt the world closing in around him. Behind him, he heard Daniel's door open. Selena noticed. "No!" she screamed. "You're not going anywhere." She reached into her coat. For a terrifying moment, Nolan saw his own death, Selena lunging, a weapon glinting, desperation overtaking reason. But she didn't pull a gun. She pulled a vial. A small, familiar-looking vial, labeled with the same sedative Eleanor had been overdosed on. She held it up like a trophy. "I kept it. Proof I thought I'd never need." Daniel shouted. "Nolan, move!" Selena lunged. Nolan stumbled backward, slipping on gravel. The vial shattered between them, glass scattering. Selena rushed forward again, hands clawing, screaming incoherently. Daniel reached them in seconds, grabbing her arms and pulling her back. Selena thrashed violently. "Let me go!" He ruined everything. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Detective Holt had followed Daniel's backup call. Selena screamed until her voice broke, until officers tore her from the ground, until the law finally placed steel around her wrists. Marcus, found minutes later running from the warehouse, was tackled to the ground, cursing Nolan's name. And Nolan, he sank to his knees, not from fear, not from victory, but from the unendurable, suffocating weight of realizing his mother had died fighting alone, surrounded by predators disguised as loved ones, and he hadn't been there. Holt approached slowly. "It's over, Nolan." But as he knelt on the cold concrete, tears dripping onto shattered glass, he whispered, "No, it's not over. Not until she gets the justice she deserved." Holt placed a hand on his shoulder, "And she will. But Nolan didn't rise right away. For the first time since Eleanor died, he let himself cry, not in anger, not in confusion, but in release. He wasn't broken anymore. He was awakening. The courthouse felt strangely quiet on the morning of the arraignment, far quieter than Nolan expected, for a day that would finally pull the truth into the light. Gray clouds hung low, brushing the tops of the buildings as if the sky itself were waiting for a verdict. Nolan stood at the foot of the courthouse steps, the cold wind threading through his coat, carrying the muted echo of passing cars. Graham and Daniel flanked him in their usual formation, a silent reassurance that he wasn't walking into this alone. Ready? Graham asked softly. No one really asks that question, expecting a yes. Nolan didn't offer one. He simply inhaled deeply and began climbing the steps. Inside, 2 courtroom doors were open. One filled with murmuring reporters, hungry for scandal. The other reserved for family members and those directly involved. Nolan followed Daniel through the second entrance. The instant he stepped inside, the weight of the room pressed down on him. A semicircle of wooden benches faced the front, where the judge's bench towered above everything else. Officers filled the perimeter. Selena and Marcus were already seated at the defense table, wrists free for now, but guarded on each side. Their lawyer, a polished, expensive-looking man, leaned in, whispering something to them. Marcus stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Selena, however, turned and locked eyes with Nolan the moment he entered. Her expression was a storm rage, desperation, disbelief. The woman who once whispered promises into his ear now glared at him as though he had stolen her entire future. Maybe he had, but only because she had stolen his life first. Detective Holt approached Nolan with a brief nod. Today's about presenting the preliminary case to the judge, based on the evidence. We expect he'll deny bail. Then the charges proceed to formal indictment. Nolan nodded, though he barely trusted his voice to stay steady. The judge entered moments later, stern and sharp-eyed, and the room rose, once seated again. Proceedings began. Case number 22 to 947. The clerk called, "The State versus Selena Ward and Marcus Hale." Selena's attorney stood smoothly. "Your Honor, before we proceed, my clients wish to make a statement." "No," the prosecutor snapped, rising just as swiftly. "They may speak when it is their turn. The state requests that evidence be reviewed prior to any statements." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Detective Holt stepped forward, a stack of files in hand. "Your Honor, the state presents documented evidence showing unauthorized access to the victim's medical records, forged signatures on legal and insurance documents, and testimony from hospital staff regarding coercion and manipulation of the victim before her death." Marcus shifted, face reddening. Holt continued, "We also present a voice recording of the defendants discussing a coordinated effort to pressure the victim into signing documents she was not mentally capable of understanding." A tight murmur rippled through the benches. Selena shot to her feet. That recording was taken illegally. Her attorney pulled her back down, whispering harshly. She jerked her arm away but stayed seated. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Ward, you will remain silent unless addressed." Holt then submitted the broken vial found at the warehouse location, along with toxicology comparisons showing its contents matched the sedatives used on Eleanor. Nolan flinched, seeing it now labeled, bagged. Evidence of the final cruelty made something inside him ache in a way he had never experienced before. The prosecutor spoke next. "Your Honor, based on the evidence, we are requesting that both defendants be held without bail. They present a flight risk and, given the severity of charges including conspiracy, elder abuse, forgery, and suspected homicide, we believe they may attempt to obstruct justice if released." Marcus's attorney rose. "These allegations are blown wildly out of proportion. My clients maintain their innocence. They care deeply for the victim." Nolan couldn't help it. He laughed under his breath, short, bitter. Every head turned toward him. He didn't apologize. The judge turned to the defense table. Do either defendant wish to speak before I make my ruling? To Nolan's astonishment, Marcus stood. Not Selena. Marcus. His face was tight, but something in his eyes, fear, shame, exhaustion, looked different. Your Honor, Marcus began, voice wavering. I want to be clear. I didn't change any medication orders. I didn't touch any hospital files. Selena's head whipped toward him. Marcus, she hissed. But he went on, louder, desperate. I accessed records, yes, but she, he pointed at Selena. She told me it was allowed. She said Nolan knew. I didn't know anything illegal was happening. I didn't know she. Marcus, shut up, Selena snapped, lunging toward him. The courtroom erupted. Officers restrained Selena instantly, holding her back as she screamed. You coward, don't betray me. Her voice cracked into rage, feral, unrestrained. Marcus backed away, shaking. She did it, not me. She planned it all. I never touched that woman's medication. She said if I helped distract Nolan, we'd start a business together. That she'd get money from Eleanor's policy. That, Marcus, Selena shrieked. I will ruin you. You were nothing before me. The judge slammed his gavel. Order, but there was no order left to salvage. Selena thrashed until 2 officers pinned her arms behind her. Marcus collapsed back into his chair, head in his hands. Their perfect facade, shiny, charming, poisonous, had shattered completely, and Nolan watched. Not triumphantly, not vengefully, just quietly. The prosecutor addressed the judge again. Your Honor, the outburst speaks for itself. The state reiterates its request to deny bail. The judge took a deep breath. Bail is denied. Both defendants will remain in custody pending formal charges. Selena screamed not words but pure fury, the kind that came from losing everything she believed she deserved. Marcus didn't scream, he simply sank deeper. Shrinking as officers closed in, the judge adjourned the session. The officers moved swiftly to escort the defendants out separate doors. Selena fought every step, her eyes locking onto Nolan one final time. You ruined my life, she spat. Nolan met her gaze steadily. You ruined your own. She recoiled as if struck. Marcus didn't look at him at all. When the room cleared, Nolan's legs felt weak. He lowered himself to a bench, elbows on his knees, letting his breath return slowly. Graham sat beside him. You did it. Daniel stood on his other side. No, he corrected quietly. He didn't do it. He survived it. Detective Holt approached, her tone softer than he'd ever heard it. The formal investigation will continue, but today was decisive. They won't hurt anyone else. Not again. Nolan nodded, but his mind wasn't in the courtroom anymore. It drifted to his mother. The way her hands trembled when she wrote in her ledger, the warnings she tried to give, the bravery she showed even while dying, the love she carried for him even when he didn't see the danger around them. He whispered, more to himself than anyone. She deserved better. Holt placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. And now, because of you, she'll get justice. Nolan exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for months. Justice, not peace, not closure, but justice. A start. Outside, the sky finally broke open, letting down a cold, cleansing rain. Nolan stepped into it without raising his hood. The water ran down his face, washing away the courtroom's heavy air. What now? Graham asked. Nolan looked at him, then up at the clouds. I think, he said slowly, I go home, not to the house I had with Selena, but to my mother's house, the one she built, the one she loved, the one she left for me. You're not planning to stay alone, are you? Daniel asked. Nolan smiled faintly. Not alone, not anymore, and for the first time in a long, painful journey. Nolan Reyes felt something unfamiliar, fragile but real blooming in his chest. A beginning, not of revenge, not of darkness, but of healing. It would take time, but he was ready for time now. He walked down the courthouse steps, the rain soaking into his clothes, and felt Eleanor beside him, not in memory, but in spirit. He whispered to her, We made it, Mom. And though no voice answered, the wind felt warm against his cheek. He took it as her yes. In the end, Nolan's journey reminds us of one of life's hardest truths. Evil often hides behind familiar faces, and love alone cannot blind us to betrayal, but it also teaches us something far more powerful, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand up for truth even when your world is falling apart. Healing does not come from forgetting the pain. It comes from reclaiming your story, honoring those who protected you, and choosing to rise after being broken. Nolan learned that justice can be slow, fragile, and costly, but it is never out of reach for those who refuse to give up. What about you? What part of this story resonated most deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next chapter.